Asterisk, you remember a conversation you overheard once in the cafeteria between two older guards who'd been stationed at the Southern Post back in the 90s. One of them had said, in a voice not meant to be recorded, "Some things aren't new, they're just waking up again." At the time, it didn't mean much to you. Now it echoes. The hours continue. Somewhere across the compound, a series of lights turn on in an office near the main hangars. The patrol shift changes. A routine weather drone launches. You catch the shimmer of its wings under the moon as it heads north. None of this disturbs the light, and you begin to sense something else. It doesn't just persist, it knows it's being watched. Not with malice. Not with intention in the human sense, just awareness. Like the desert itself, or the way owls blink slowly before deciding something. You reach for the notebook again. The page has shifted slightly in the night breeze from the air vent. On the reverse of the 13th light note, someone has scribbled a second line, smaller, less legible, as though the writer wasn't sure they wanted to finish the thought, only visible when the others look away. That part doesn't make immediate sense until you begin to test it one by one. Your eyes travel across the standard perimeter lights. Lights 1 through 12, familiar, bright, predictable, and when you land on the spot where the 13th should be, it's gone, not off, just gone, invisible, but when your eyes relax, when you allow yourself to drift again, not fixate, it's there once more, as though it only exists in the corner of vision. In the breath between blinks, you repeat the experiment 3 times. Same result. The 13th light is not for direct viewing, it is for glimpsing. The wind outside picks up slightly. Nothing major, but the sand shifts across the southern fence in long ribbons. The low sound of particles brushing metal, dry. An ancient reaches the tower. There's a story some of the guards tell in whispers when they've had a drink or two. It isn't written in manuals. It isn't confirmed by superiors. But it lingers in the culture like all good half-truths do. They say there's an old light on the original schematic, older than the perimeter system, older than the current designation of Watchtower 3. It's marked not by number, but by absence, a dark node between sectors. A place not built onto the land, but around something already there. No one's ever found the original blueprint, but the story persists. And now you begin to wonder, is this the same light? Is this what they meant? You scan the dark again, not expecting confirmation. But the moment your gaze relaxes, the second you stop trying to see, it reappears there, steady, patient, and now you feel it, the subtle shift in the tower. Not in temperature or vibration, but in tone. The hum beneath your boots sounds just a little more layered, as if it's echoing back from below, a second source. Deeper than the foundation, the light holds and you begin to understand. Not just waiting to be seen, it's waiting to be remembered. By the time the sun begins its slow climb beyond the ridgeline, the desert shifts again, not rapidly, not with drama, but with a kind of slow and ancient intention. The stars fade one by one, not erased but dimmed, like thoughts allowed to fall asleep. The temperature rises by degrees almost too subtle to feel, and the color of the sky violet, then gray-blue, then the lightest amber washes gently across. The sands, the tower creaks once, and you're still there. The light, the 13th, unwinking, unregistered one, is no longer visible, not in the soft glare of early daylight. The other perimeter lights fade too, one by one, their sensors, registering dawn. But this one doesn't power down because it never powered on. It simply isn't there anymore. Or rather, it returns to wherever it lives when it's not being noticed. You don't lock the light. That's never been how these things are done. Not officially, not on paper, but in the margins of the black notebook, on a page near the back, where older guards have scratched simple details, moon phases, odd timings, brief patterns. You add one more note, 317, seen again, faint, still steady, lower than line 12, awareness. You pause for a moment, then draw a short line underneath dot. It feels like closure. Not an end, not an answer. Just a pause. The desert outside is empty again, but not hollow dot. Now it feels held, as though everything that passed in the night, everything witnessed and not named, everything glimpsed, is still there. Just waiting in a layer below the visible world. The shift change is quiet, as it always is. The next guard arrives without words, climbing the metal stair with the even rhythm of someone who's done it for years. There's no formal greeting, just a nod, a glance. You stand, stretch gently, hand off the chair. The notebook remains where it was. No one asks what you wrote. No one ever does, because the culture here runs beneath the language. It is the unsaid that's respected. The pause between questions, the air between signals. There are things in this place that speak in ways not recorded by frequencies. As you descend, your boots echo softly on the steel treads. Below, the compound begins its day. Janitorial carts ease past the dormitory blocks. A dog barks once, far off, then is quiet. The sound of machinery hums from the vehicle bay. The mess hall opens its doors, but you keep your gaze west past the last hangar, to where the ridge curves low, half hiding the place where the 13th light was. And is, because it doesn't feel gone, only quiet again. This place, Area 51. Dreamland, the base has always been defined more by what isn't seen than what is. There are buildings without names, hallways without noise, reports with missing lines. But it isn't sinister, not in this moment. It's simply designed to hold layers, and the light fits, not as a mistake, not as a threat. As part of the rhythm, back in the main hallway, you pass by the photo board. Black and white images of the base through the years. 1955, 1971, 1983. A few of the photos are unlabeled. One, placed toward the bottom, shows the compound from a height that no current building could produce. It's an old photo. Grainy. But just to the side, below the sweep of a security tower long since torn down, is a faint steady point of light. Out of alignment, lower, dimmer. You step closer. It's almost perfectly aligned with where the 13th light sits now, but that photo is at least 50 years old, and that light wasn't supposed to exist then. It isn't supposed to exist now, yet it has been there, through decades, through upgrades, through systems that replaced themselves. The light remained, never documented, never disturbed. You wonder now if those who built the current system knew, if they marked it somehow in the schematic, not with a label, but maybe with an absence, a space, a note that said nothing. All outside, the sky is fully awake. The sun crests the eastern horizon, warm and blinding. Shadows stretch westward, lean and long, but the ridge line where the light once hovered glows softly under its own color. You can't see the light anymore, but you don't need to. It isn't something to observe. It's something to remember. And now, it's part of the pattern, part of your pattern, because, with quiet certainty, that on some distant night, maybe months from now, maybe much sooner, you will return to Watchtower 3, and you'll look for it again. Not with hope, not with expectation. With understanding. The desert will be the same. The base will hum. The perimeter lights will blink in rhythm. The coffee will taste, as it always does. And when the hour is late and the others are looking elsewhere, the 13th light will return. There's something different about nightfall in the Nevada desert. It doesn't descend like a curtain. It expands, spills. It begins as a gentle cooling of the air around the base of the mountains, then seeps slowly into the sand, deepening. the shadows until the whole base sits beneath a sky thick with stars. Stars you never see elsewhere, not this way. They crowd together in places, scattered in others, a slow drift of constellations that seem closer than they should. From this high in Watchtower 3, the whole perimeter of Area 51 unfolds like a darkened diorama. Fence lines stretch out with measured precision. Beyond them, the desert continues, empty, serene, unbothered. Further still, the hills rise quietly against the horizon like the backs of sleeping animals, and the sky glows faintly violet in their direction. The interior lights of the tower are dimmed, as they always are during the late shift, just a soft orange glow from the lower panel, enough to outline the familiar curves of the control board and the edge of the old black notebook that's been passed from shift to shift longer than anyone bothers to remember. Your eyes drift slowly across the screens. There are no alarms, no pings. The motion sensors are silent. Just the low, steady sweep of the spotlight that passes over the east perimeter every 42 seconds. Its movement so regular it might be the heartbeat of the base itself. You feel the gentle hum of the ventilation system beneath your boots. A low murmur, mechanical breath. The scent in the tower is as it always is. Dust, static, paper, and something faint beneath it. The trace of ozone that never entirely leaves the air, even indoors. A mug rests near your elbow. Still warm, dark roast black. You don't remember the last time you took a sip that far below. A truck eases across the access road, headlights dimmed. It's slow, methodical. No one's in a rush here. The entire compound breathes in a long rhythm. Shaped by routine, softened by habit, tonight is like most nights, but only mostly, because from this height, and with this quiet, you begin to notice the details, the kind that surface only when everything else is still, the red perimeter lights. For example, there are exactly 82. You've counted them before out of boredom or curiosity. They pulse softly in sequence, except for the third one past the southeast gate. That one always flickers twice before sinking again. Maintenance says it's a wiring thing, but it's been like that for months. Somehow no one ever fixes it. Then there's the low building beyond Hangar 4. It has no official name, just a designation in the log. Structure G17, the kind of place no one talks about much. You've never been assigned to it. No one's ever walked out of it. But every few nights, at this same hour, a single strip of light glows from beneath its east-facing door for roughly 9 minutes before vanishing again. No movement. No sound, just that soft glow. And then nothing. You lean back in the chair, letting the tower creak gently beneath your weight. The silence here is different from the kind in cities. It isn't empty. It has layers, depth. You can feel the weight of distance pressing against the walls, the long stretch of flat land between you and anything that breathes outside the wire. The radios are quiet tonight. Channel 3, which sometimes carries chatter from the internal patrols, hasn't crackled in almost half an hour. Channel 5, the encrypted line, rarely says anything at all. But sometimes, like tonight, it buzzes faintly with a sound that isn't voice. Not static, either. Something between a low oscillation. It doesn't interfere. It doesn't request. It only lingers. There's an understanding here, among those who take the night watch. You don't talk too much about what you see. Not because you're told not to, but because there's something sacred about the silence. About letting things be observed without being named. The older guards say there's a comfort in it, like sitting beside a campfire that burns without flame, where the heat is in the memory, not the ember. You glance again at the perimeter. A dust devil stirs near the north fence, then fades. The stars are brighter now, and for a moment, you find yourself watching the sky more than the screens. There are patterns you've started to recognize, not constellations, but arrangements. Shapes that return subtly every few nights. Somewhere over the western ridge, a faint green glimmer pulses once, then disappears. Not a flare, not a drone, just light. Brief and soft. The logbook remains untouched. But on its top page, beneath the coffee stain from the previous shift, someone has left a single line. The 13th light doesn't blink. You read it once, then again. There's no 13th light on the perimeter. Not officially. But from here, if you count carefully, there's something, a soft point between the 12th and 14th, lower than the others, dimmer. A light that doesn't blink, doesn't move, doesn't react. Just stays. You've never noticed it before. The hum of the tower seems quieter now, as though listening with you. Outside, the desert holds its breath. The desert doesn't change quickly. That's one of the quiet truths you come to know here. Winds may shape the dunes by inches, and rain, when it comes, softens the edge of stone, but the real shifts happen in stillness. A track erased, a hill slightly lower, a light that didn't used to be there. Back in Watchtower 3. The world remains the same to anyone passing by. A simple control panel, red and green indicators, a row of silent screens showing the same calm stretch of perimeter. But now, you know to look differently. The 13th light. It has no switch, no designation. Nothing in the system reflects it, but from the tower's vantage, just above the seam of the southern ridge, it appears, dim, constant, resting beneath the usual row of security beacons, half obscured by the natural slope of the land. Don't check the camera grid. You already know it won't show up there. You just watch it. And for the first time, you realize this. It doesn't seem like it's meant to be seen from ground level, only from here, only from this angle. Which means someone or something placed it knowing where the tower would be. It's hard to say how long the light's been there. Perhaps it's always been unnoticed, unremarkable. But the notebook entry, scrawled by someone on a previous shift, shifts it from background to foreground. And now it doesn't feel passive anymore. It feels waiting. There's something about this place that cultivates questions not meant to be answered in full. Summer routine, what's really stored in sublevel C? Why does the east corridor of the mess hall never echo? Why do the weather balloons sometimes land before they're launched? But the 13th light, it doesn't feel like a question. It feels like an invitation. You return your eyes to the interior of the tower. The radio crackles softly with an old loop check-in from another sector. Someone confirming access to Hangar 8, all protocol. Background sound. Below the desk, the locker that holds the standard issue scope remains closed, but you remember its contents well. Too far for a scope anyway. The light isn't something you can inspect, only witness. Outside, the low hum of the base's ambient systems continues. Somewhere, a door closes softly. You wonder distantly if anyone else sees the light from their post, or if Watchtower 3 is uniquely aligned, like a pinhole in a long-forgotten lens. The room behind you carries no reflection on the windows. It's all black glass now. You sit in a small capsule of visibility above the desert, not apart from it, but set within it like a calm node. Part of a pattern you can almost feel. That's something else you've noticed lately. Patterns. Small ones, unremarkable at first. A sound that always precedes a radio failure. A power blink exactly 31 seconds before every coded uplink. The way certain supply deliveries arrive a day early without record, they don't match clockwork. They match rhythm, which is different. And now, this light, this unmoving, unwinking 13th point seems less like a mistake and more like a beat, a held note. But part of a song where a breath is drawn and not yet exhaled. You lean forward. In your chair, not urgently, just curiously. It hasn't changed. Not brightened. Not faded. It simply is. The cafeteria at Area 51 isn't large. It isn't meant to be. It occupies the east side of the main block, halfway between the vehicle garage and the personnel barracks, nestled beside a service hallway that always smells faintly of overcooked rice and electrical ozone. Inside, it's a rectangle of simplicity white walls tinged gray with time, scuffed linoleum floors, steel-edged chairs arranged in grid-like order, and long fluorescent lights that hum just enough to remind you they're alive. Everything about it speaks of repetition. The tables are wiped 3 times a day, always by the same staff member, Gloria, whose presence is marked by the rustle of her cleaning apron and the soft thump of a rag against laminate. The drink machine only ever half works, with the lemon lime tap offering a suspicious hiss instead of carbonation. The far corner near the fridge buzzes slightly, always warmer than the rest of the room, though no one's fixed the thermostat since 2009, and yet, despite all its ordinariness, there's one feature of the cafeteria that doesn't match the rest out the window. Not the one beside the serving counter, which faces the courtyard. Not the one above the exit door, which is usually fogged. But the third window, recessed into the far wall by the back right table. The one that faces nothing. You notice it more when the cafeteria is empty, which it often is during the late shift. The lights remain on, dim to half brightness, and the benches echo if anyone taps a foot too hard. But that third window, positioned just a little too high for a seated glance, doesn't reflect the inside of the room, and doesn't show anything outside. Just to softness, not blackness. Not glare. Not the blurred outline of desert sand or fencing or a building wall. Just a subtle, diffused gray, constant, gentle, unchanging. You've passed it many times before, sometimes with a tray, sometimes just crossing from one end of the room to the other, and every time your peripheral vision registers it, that muted pain. A window that doesn't give, doesn't respond, doesn't reflect. It's always there, and yet never quite part of the room. There are no labels on the wall, no exit sign, no ventilation port. Just the single rectangular frame, painted the same. Dull beige as the wall, trim faded from years of cafeteria humidity. On some days, it's easy to forget. On others, it feels like the only thing in the room with any intention. The first time you really noticed it, the shift had just ended. The morning rush hadn't started yet. The sun was just beginning to push its heat against the siding of the building. You'd stop for water, sat for a moment, and glanced toward it. What you expected was the reflection of the room. Maybe the rows of chairs. Maybe yourself. Instead, there was nothing. No image, no distortion. Just that dim gray plane, like a screen with the brightness turned all the way down. But what struck you wasn't the color. It was the feeling that something on the other side had noticed you noticing it. Not a figure, not a movement. Just the faint electric sense of awareness. You didn't linger that time, but it stayed with you. A week later, someone from the security maintenance crew made an offhand comment over coffee. "That window hasn't been cleaned in years," he said, shrugging, "because it doesn't get dirty." And it's true. Gloria never wipes it. No smudges ever appear. No dust settles up the sill. Not like the others. Even the metal frame, which should be rusted at the corners, remains dry, unblemished, as though time forgets to land there. You've sat near it a few times since, not deliberately. At least not at first, but the cafeteria empties easily during night hours, and you often find yourself at the rear table, the one just to the left of the window, eating slowly, letting the quiet fill the space. And always it's there. That soft panel of gray. It doesn't glow, doesn't flicker, but neither does it darken when the power flickers. As it sometimes does. It simply remains. You once asked Gloria, in the gentlest way possible, if she'd ever seen anything move behind it. She laughed softly, drying her hands on a towel. "Baby, I stopped asking questions about this place in '03, which might have been a joke, but it didn't feel like one. later that week. After a long shift in Watchtower 1, you wandered in just before the kitchen closed. It was empty. No staff. No music. No lights in the hallway beyond Dot, just the soft hum of the fridge. And that window, Dot, it seemed brighter that night. Not glowing, just clearer. As though the mist had pulled back slightly. Still no scene, no figures, but the depth was there. More like looking into a deep pool than across a pane of glass. You stood beside it, slowly, one hand resting on the edge of the bench, Dot, and for the first time, you leaned in close, Dot. No temperature came off the glass. Not warm, not cold. Your reflection was faint, too faint. Even with the room lit, your image didn't come back fully, and in that moment, for just one breathless heartbeat, you had the feeling that if you pressed your palm to the surface, ... something would press back, but you didn't. You stepped away, and the gray softened again, returning to its steady, unreadable calm. Now, weeks later, the memory of that moment returns more and more, especially during the quietest shifts when the cafeteria is still, and the rest of the base hums along its rehearsed daily lines, because you've begun to wonder if it's not showing out, and it's not showing in. Then where does the window look? By daylight, the cafeteria window returns to its usual strangeness, barely noticeable, just another feature in a room defined by routine. Forks clatter gently into metal trays. Chairs slide across the floor with that same familiar rubber skip. Sound. 2 technicians in olive jumpsuits discuss maintenance near the serving counter. Someone drops a bottle cap. Someone else laughs at a joke no one else hears. But the window remains the quietest thing in the room. You begin to notice how it manages to be unnoticed. It draws no attention, it reflects no color, it offers no change with the hour. But once you do become aware of it, it lingers behind everything, like a note held beneath the music, or the pressure behind a closed door. You take your usual seat again, near the rear wall. This has become habit now, not for proximity, not for study, just closeness. A quiet gravity that draws your tray to the same tabletop each evening. Today's meal is bland, as usual. Rice, protein cubes, something that might once have been chicken, but the food barely registers. Your attention rests gently on the space beside you. There is no sound from the window. Not even the faint hiss of pressure that should come from a building wall facing the open desert. Nothing. It's as if the glass opens not into the outside, but into a sealed chamber with no atmosphere at all. At first you wondered if it was sealed, overblocked from behind, painted or frosted on some external surface. But when you walked around the outer wall weeks ago, during that quiet maintenance shift, you saw nothing. No wall, no glass, no structure on the other side of the cafeteria. Just. A sheer panel of concrete, smooth, seamless, undisturbed, which doesn't match, because from inside, the window is perfectly centered, perfectly framed. There's depth behind it, subtle shading, a sense of interiority, not exterior space, and the more you study it, the more you begin to suspect it doesn't open onto anything. It opens into something, a field, maybe, not of space, but of memory, or atmosphere. Something ancient and undisturbed. You've taken to writing notes now, quiet ones folded in the notebook you keep in your back pocket, not for evidence, not for study, just to track what you feel, because nothing about the window seems interested in being proven. You've written things like color unchanged, even at noon. No sound of wind, even when storm outside. It feels like it listens. That last one you wrote slowly, because it isn't something you can describe, only something you've come to sense. The window doesn't watch. There's no shape behind the glass, no movement, no form, but it registers. The way old trees register presence. The way deep caves hold sound, even when empty. And then there's the matter of the dreams. You've only had 3 that you can recall. All of them on nights following long shifts near the cafeteria. None violent, none vivid, just dense, filled with gray light and silence. Long corridors of nothing, not threatening, not endless. Just still in each one. You find yourself walking, not with legs, but with awareness, through pale, soft spaces that never echo. The kind of places where time doesn't collect and always, somewhere along a seamless wall, is a rectangle of light, dim, frosted, familiar. You never reach it. You wake before you do, but the image remains in your waking hours. You try not to dwell on these things too deeply. The space, like the desert surrounding it, rewards quiet routines, not grand conclusions. Too many questions, and people begin to notice. And when people notice, the quiet shifts. And you've come to understand, it's the quiet the window seems to like so you preserve it. You eat without haste. You fold your napkin. You sip your tea slowly. And still, the window lingers. One morning, Gloria notices your glance. Been looking at that thing again? She asks with a sideways smile. She's not mocking you. Not exactly. Looks like a window, doesn't it? She adds, before you can reply. But it isn't, not really. You hesitate. What is it then? She wipes her hands on her apron and thinks it's what you see through when something remembers you back. Then she turns and walks away. You think she's joking, but the words ring too clearly in your mind. Later that week, you pass by the kitchen early before the breakfast. Trays are set out, the lights are dimmed. Only the hallway fixtures spill soft orange light across the tiled floor. And there, in the stillness, the window seems different again, brighter. No, but sharper, like something just on the other side has shifted slightly toward the glass. You step closer, slow, respectful, as if approaching a person, and your hand hovers near the frame. Not touching, just aware, and for one small moment, just a flicker, you sense a movement on the inside of the glass, not a shape. Shift, like a breath being held, and just as quickly, stillness again, silence reasserts itself. You back away gently. No one sees you. The kitchen lights click on moments later. Life resumes. Trays roll out. Boots scuff the floors. But the window, once again, returns to its perfect gray calm. You eat quietly that morning. The usual corner, the usual seat, and through it all, the window rests beside you, quiet, steady, unreflected, waiting not to be understood, but to be remembered. There's a soft routine to the closing of the cafeteria at night. The clatter of trays fades. First, followed by the low hum of the vending unit as it powers down. The dishwasher's final cycle murmurs behind closed doors. Chairs are nudged back under tables with practiced indifference. And the fluorescent lights overhead drop to half brightness with a sound like moth wings brushing glass. Eventually, only the glow from the exit sign remains, casting a dull red wash across the far wall. And beneath that, the window waits, the one that never reflects, the one that never shows what's behind it, the one that seems more a suggestion than a fixture. You find yourself there again tonight, not from duty, not from curiosity, but from something quieter. A kind of shared stillness, like revisiting a memory that doesn't belong entirely to you. The rest of the base sleeps in its way. The power grid hums in measured tones. The hallways breathe in filtered cycles, and the desert outside curls into itself beneath a soft navy sky. You take your place at the rear table, the one nearest the gray pane. No tray this time. No coffee. Just silence. The window is unchanged. Flat. Soft. Empty. But it feels more present tonight. You can sense it before. You even look. A pressure, almost, though not physical, more like an absence made intentional. The way a room feels when someone has just left it, or just arrived. And though there's no movement within the pane, no glow or outline, it feels attentive as if it too has come to meet you. You lean back in the chair and let your breathing slow. No one passes through this wing at this hour. The cleaning crew has already moved on. The service hallway hums quietly. Far down the corridor, a single panel flickers on and off in rhythm, unnoticed by anyone else. And the window waits. You remember something a technician once said in passing, a new hire, someone who hadn't lasted more than 2 weeks. They'd been checking the vent seals near the kitchen, kneeling just below the window. You'd overheard them mutter, almost to themselves. It's like it's in between, like it's listening sideways. You hadn't understood at the time, but now it makes a strange sort of sense, because this window doesn't face outward or inward. It faces elsewhere. Somewhere that exists not in geography, but in tone. The dreams returned last night. Same as before. Long corridors, soft. Light, no echo, no fear. Just that feeling of presence moving alongside your own, not tracking, not testing. Just observing. Like a mirrored version of stillness. And always there at the end. The same frosted panel, waiting. But this time in the dream, you drew near. Close enough to feel the faint warmth from the other side, and though you never saw through it, something within you felt that if you had just one more moment, one more breath and said that dream, you might have remembered why it was familiar. Now. And waking, that closeness lingers. You sit beside the real version, the frame of the cafeteria's unlit boundary, and you begin to think, maybe this isn't a window at all. Not in the structural sense. Maybe it's more of a threshold, not a portal. Not a gateway, something subtler, like a page of paper between two closed books. Something that holds both volumes apart, but also together. Something that connects not through passage, but through awareness. You reach into your back pocket and unfold the notebook again. Tonight's note is simple. You don't need to say much anymore. It doesn't show. It remembers. You close the notebook gently. No one is coming, not now. You have time to sit here in the hush and simply allow the moment to rest. You glance at the window again, not seeking, not testing, and something softens. The gray still just gray feels less like fog, more like depth. Like looking into a folded space, a waiting silence. A place where memory sits in suspension, not forgotten, but not forced. You understand now that there are things at the base that are not classified because they are dangerous. They're classified because they are delicate. This window, whatever it is, does not ask to be figured out, that it asks only to be shared with, quietly, without pressure, without curiosity trying to collapse it into definition. And so you sit and breathe, and simply let it be. By the time the lights return to full brightness and the morning staff begins to shuffle in, you've already stood and made your way back. Through the side corridor, no one stops you. No one asks where you've been. They never do. But when you glance back from the hallway's end, just once the pane of the window seems to shimmer, not visibly, not brightly, just attentively, as though saying, I remember too. There's a hallway beneath Sector D that most people don't talk about, not because it's restricted, not because it's dangerous, just because it's old, older than most of the base by all accounts. The concrete is a different shade there, not the soft beige of newer expansions or the cold thin metal of experimental wings. Instead, it's an almost bluish gray, poured in thick slabs with a faint texture like dried riverbed clay. The walls carry faint mineral lines, places where the surface has subtly cracked but never crumbled. Most people call it the cold hall. You pass through it sometimes when detouring between the mess and storage. It's never your destination, only a connector. It's too quiet, too dim. No overhead music reaches here. No intercom announcements echo off these walls. And the temperature always sits several degrees cooler than the rest of the base. Even when the surrounding floors bake in summer. It's in this hallway, during one of your early late night shifts, that you first saw him, not from far away. Not in the shadows. He was already standing at the base of the maintenance panel, halfway down the corridor, holding a clipboard, pen in hand, wearing the standard dark blue coveralls, with the white facility ops patch stitched at the shoulder, though his was older. A different font, slightly faded. The kind you only see in the archival footage displayed in training rooms. You paused. Not an alarm, just curiosity. The hallway was supposed to be clear after 2300. No work orders logged. No door panels showing. Flags. Yet there he was, calm and precise. Not working so much as inspecting. You remember how quiet it felt. Not empty, but contained. Like the moment had been set aside for the two of you. He looked up only once, nodded. Nothing out of the ordinary, but there was something in his face, not his features. Those were ordinary, clean-shaven, pale, hair clipped short. But the expression, it was timeless, like someone who had held the same expression for decades and had long since forgotten any other. You offered a brief greeting. He nodded again. His voice, when it came, was even and low. Routine visual pass, no record needed. And that was it. He returned to the panel. You moved on, but something lingered. Later that night, you checked the log. No maintenance work had been scheduled for that corridor. Not just that evening, not for weeks. No reports, no malfunctions, no request tags. You scanned further back. The system archived everything. Nothing. And yet, you saw him, clearly, calmly, presently. Over the weeks, you began to notice a pattern. Once, during a walk past Utility Sector 3, you glimpsed him again. Standing near a vent access port, eyes cast downward, reading something. Same uniform, same clipboard, same stillness. Another time, near the coolant tanks behind generator row. Alone again. No lights flashing. No tools drawn. Each time, he looked up. Each time, he nodded. Each time, he said only the same few words. Routine visual pass. No record needed. You never questioned it aloud, but after the third sighting, curiosity took root. You asked quietly. At the break room, described him vaguely. Maintenance worker. Tall, pale, older style uniform. Reactions varied. Some squinted, trying to recall. Some shrugged. But one technician, older, quiet, the kind who'd been around longer than the walls, looked up slowly and said, "You mean Clark?" You waited. Seen him a few times myself, the tech said, voice low. Always alone. Always when the place is quiet. You know what's funny though? You tilted your head. He looks exactly the same as he did when I was new. And that was 15 years ago. No one laughed. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, longer than it should have. Then, as always happens at the base, the moment dissolved. Someone changed the subject, the fridge clicked on. The noise returned, but you remembered. And after that, you looked, not searching, just observing, and sure enough, he'd appear. Always when the base was still. Always in a place not scheduled for use. Always alone. Never disruptive. Never evasive, just present. One night, unable to resist, you returned early to the cold hall. No assigned duty, no patrol. Just a walk, slow and quiet, and there he was again. Same uniform, same clipboard, standing beside the old sub-panel beneath. The south-facing light, the one that flickered sometimes but never triggered. Maintenance calls. You paused. Softly, Dot, and as before, he looked up. Not a Dot, but this time you spoke first. Clark. A brief stillness. Then a faint smile, not wide, not dramatic, but something settled. Familiar. That's what they used to call me, he said, as though remembering something gently. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he turned slightly and gestured toward the panel, just making sure things stay the way they're meant to. That line, plain on the surface, sank deeper the longer it sat in the air. He didn't stay long after that Dot, just one more nod, and he turned the corner. You waited. Counted 10 seconds, followed Dot. The hallway beyond was empty, only the faint scent of ozone remained, a trace of machine oil, and a small scuff mark on the floor beside the wall, too recent to have settled into dust. No records. No logs. No mention. Just the soft understanding shared between those who notice. No, you find yourself passing through the cold hall more often, slowly, with attention, and sometimes, just sometimes, you feel the space behind you pause, as though someone is watching quietly, clipboard in hand, making sure the silence holds. Time at Area 51 moves in a rhythm distinct from the outside world. It's not marked by the hour or the calendar, but by maintenance logs, keycard resets, and the distant drone of turbines spinning at constant, unhurried velocity. Shift rotations come and go. The same meals are served. The same corridors are walked. But sometimes, beneath the layers of repetition, a different kind of time begins to surface. The kind that doesn't tick forward. The kind that sits. You've begun to notice more moments like that since seeing Clark. Not the moments when he appears, but the ones around his appearances. The air feels slightly heavier. The lights buzz just a little differently. Vents that usually exhale warmth feel cooler for a few minutes. And always, the sounds in the hallway drop by just a decibel or two. As if the bass itself is bracing for something it has long since learned not to name. On the third week of keeping loose observation, you find yourself in Archive Hall 5. It's not on your usual path, not even near your sector. But after checking the logs, you discover it's one of the oldest corridors on the base, possibly original construction. No cameras, no regular foot traffic. The lighting is all sodium orange, dim, and oddly nostalgic. Along the wall, ancient filing cabinets sit bolted in place, most sealed shut, their labels long since faded. You're not there for the files. You're watching the far end, where the panel lights above a forgotten maintenance door blink slowly. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off. Exactly. And after 7 full cycles, you see him. Clark. He doesn't emerge from the door. He's just there. Not as an apparition, nothing ghostly or ill-defined. Simply. Present, as if he'd always been standing there, and your awareness finally caught up. Same uniform, same clipboard. No sound when he moves. This time, he looks directly at you, not rudely, not even with scrutiny. Just calmly, the way someone might look at a weather vane or a windmill, measuring something wordless. You take a slow breath. Let it out. Why do you walk these halls? You ask, even when there's no record of you. He nods once, as if the question is expected, because some things still need to be seen. The simplicity of it leaves no room for rebuttal. You try again. Are you stationed here? I mean. Still. A small smile, not amused, not tired, just. Knowing. There was a time when people kept track, he says. But it was easier when the base was younger, before it started forgetting things. You blink. The base forgets. Places do. Just like people. He glances to his clipboard, scribbles something faint. The graphite doesn't quite reflect light, but the gesture is unmistakable, then folds it under his arm. People leave, walls stay, but what lives in between? He says more softly. That part's easy to miss, unless someone stays behind. The lights above flicker again, as if reacting to his words. Or perhaps with them. You step forward, just one pace. How long have you been here? A long pause. His eyes don't shift. His posture doesn't change. But something in the air seems to slow. Long enough that time feels more like texture than sequence. He says at last dot, and then he turns, not abruptly, not dismissively. Just a half step, enough to glance toward the end of the hall. You'll see it too if you stay. That's all dot. He walks. Silently dot, and the lights begin their rhythm once again. 3 seconds on. 3 seconds off. You stay there for a while, longer than usual, feeling the subtle pull of the air, as though it has memory, or a kind of magnetic layering where things that shouldn't happen somehow always have. Later that evening, during a systems downtime, you speak with one of the data archivists, an older civilian contractor with clearance so high it's practically dust covered. You mention the name Clark offhand. He pauses. Maintenance? He asks. You nod. There's a silence. Then I worked here in the late 80s, fresh hire. He was here then, same build, same face. I assumed he was senior staff. Still looks the same now, you say. The man chuckles, but it's a quiet sound. Not disbelief, more like recognition. Some of us don't ask, he murmurs. Not because we're afraid, but because we know the answers are already in the walls. That night, you find yourself back in the cold hall. It's empty, as usual. No noise, no footfalls, no echo, but the corridor feels different, not darker, not colder. Just aware, the way a cave feels when you're not alone, even if no one else is seen. And halfway down the wall, where a scuff mark always rests faintly, the faintest shimmer of oil glints against the floor, a fresh trace, like a step. Don't pursue him that night. There's no need. You've come to understand that Clark isn't here to be found. He's here to keep something from being lost, something between the corridors. Between the systems. Between the moments people count. And you realize then, it's not just that he hasn't aged. It's that the base remembers him better than it remembers time. The older parts of the base hum at a different frequency, not the literal kind, though you suspect the voltage regulators in those wings do carry an audible wobble, slightly off from the digital precision of the newer sectors, but something deeper, a feeling, a tempo, the cadence of a place settling into memory rather than function, and it's in those places that you feel Clark most. It's never loud, never obvious. Just a flicker at the edge of perception, a shadow moving in. Rhythm with your own, but slightly out of sync. A clipboard left on a bench, the pen balanced neatly across its spine. A boot scuff that appears after you pass the same spot for the 5th night in a row. He isn't gone, he's just between. One afternoon, during your scheduled inventory sweep, you find yourself alone in the crawlspace access hall behind sublevel C. It's a strange little corridor, more utility than architecture, never mapped properly in the base blueprints. Half-tile floor, loose conduit overhead. Every third bulb stutters with static. And as you step quietly past the rusted utility cabinet, you see it. The clipboard, balanced perfectly on a narrow ledge, dustless, precise. You don't touch it at first, you just recognize it. There's something almost ceremonial about its placement, not staged, but deliberate, like a message between two parties who don't communicate through language. Eventually, you lift it. It's lighter than expected. No cover page, just 5 sheets of fine-lined paper clipped under the bar. The first 4 are blank, but the 5th, there are notes, not blueprints, not logs, just words written by hand. In a slanted print that looks almost pre-computer, the top reads visual notes, inspection zone data unofficial, and beneath that, memory lingers stronger near foundational beams. Time isn't always first in, first out. In some places, it folds inward. The sound of leaking air often precedes residual awareness. Observation is more effective than interference. If you're reading this, it's because you noticed. You stop there, not because the page ends, but because something about that last line feels like a full sentence, a boundary. Acknowledgement. Clark knew someone else would find this. He didn't need to know when. He only needed to know someone would. You return the clipboard to the ledge, exactly as it was. And you continue your rounds with a different kind of stillness. The kind that respects not just space, but presence. And presence is exactly what you feel that evening. When you pass through the cold hall again, you're not expecting to see him. You've long stopped expecting that, but the moment you cross the halfway point just beside the cracked conduit housing, you feel it. The air changes, slows, a warmth that shouldn't be there. And then he's there. Clark. Standing at the edge of the corridor, where the floor tilts a quarter-inch lower, beside the old fuse box that hasn't sparked in decades. The shadows frame him softly, like part of the structure. His face hasn't changed, not even slightly. Not since the first time, but tonight, something else is different. He's holding the clipboard against his chest, not reading it, not marking it, just holding it. Like a keepsake. He looks at you. Not through you. Not past you. At you. And this time, he speaks first. You remember now. It isn't a question. You hesitate, then nod. Not because you understand everything. Not because you know what he is, but because you do remember. The feeling, the rhythm, the purpose. You felt it every time you walked a hallway that never ended. Every time you saw a light flicker at the same moment for reasons beyond systems. Every time a silence returned to a room, rather than simply falling over it. Clark's been here longer than records, longer than memory. Long enough that the base itself has folded around his shape. And now, standing in this corridor, you realize something else. It's not that. Clark doesn't age. It's that aging doesn't apply to him here. Because time in these walls is not measured the same way. Not where foundational beams run too deep. Not where corridors were poured over spaces already present. Not where observation is what holds everything in place. You'll keep seeing me, he says quietly, until you don't need to anymore. And with that, he nods once, not a farewell, not even a parting, just an acknowledgement between two observers. You blink and he's gone, not disappeared. Not vanished. Just . No longer in frame, but the silence remains. Full, familiar, shared. And you know, beyond reason, that he isn't gone from the base. He's still walking it, still watching, still making sure things stay the way they're meant. To and now, sorry you. Storage room 12B. Is the kind of space no one talks about unless they're assigned to clean it. It's not locked. It's not restricted. It's just unremarkable. Wedged between the secondary HVAC intake and the waterline access corridor. It's a square room with concrete walls, overhead cages of box components, a dull epoxy floor, and the smell of long settled dust. The lights buzz a little louder than they should. The walls always seem just slightly colder than the hallway outside. But otherwise, it's a normal utility space, the kind scattered across every sublevel, Area 51 each. One blending into the next like interchangeable modules in a subterranean puzzle. Except for the door, not the entrance. The other one, the one on the far wall. The one no one ever seems to mention. It has no label, no ID tag. No security panel, no keypad, no handle. Just a rectangle of reinforced metal inside into the concrete, flush with the wall, edges sealed so perfectly that you'd miss it if the light didn't catch it just so. But it's there. And once you notice it, you can't seem to unnotice it. It sits directly opposite the main entrance, which means that every time you enter 12B to replace a fuse, collect a crate, scan a barcode for quarterly inventory, you face it head on. Its surface is slightly darker than the other walls, not painted, just deeper. The kind of metal that doesn't reflect overhead light so much as absorb it, muting every glare. You don't remember the first time you really looked at it? Not. With attention. It was probably sometime after your third shift cycle. Late, quiet, when the base was in one of its sleepy hums and you were alone in the room, cross-checking manifest codes against a half-faded clipboard. You looked up casually, and for the first time, you saw it, noticed how no marks had ever scuffed its frame, how no fingerprints ever collected near its surface. How no one had ever placed a cart or a stack of crates against it, despite the storage room being routinely crowded. And you began to wonder, not fearfully, not urgently, just curiously, where does that door go? Because 1-2B is supposed to back up against an external foundation wall. A reinforced barrier, not meant to connect to any other room. According to the blueprints you later pulled from the archive terminal, there's nothing but compacted earth and heat shielding beyond it. No hallway, no chamber, no need for access. So why is there a door? And why is it so precise? You asked around, subtly. 1 or 2 fellow staffers, a logistics officer, even Gloria, who has worked every square inch of the base's service wings and speaks about them with near cartographic clarity. They all responded the same way. What door? It's not that they hadn't seen it. It's that their minds seemed to skip over it, like a word you've read so many times it stops looking like language. Even when you described it, no handle. Recessed opposite the main entry, they'd furrow their brows, nod politely, and change the subject, not defensively. Not de sivel, why just . As if it didn't hold, but for you, it did. Now. Whenever you're sent to 1-2B, you feel it before you enter, that slight change in pressure, that drop in ambient sound. The way your footsteps echo more softly against the floor as you approach. There are never footprints near the door. Not even your own. Somehow. You tried once to stand with your boots squarely in front of it, just to leave a mark. When you stepped back, the dust pattern was undisturbed. The light overhead dimmed briefly, and in that moment you felt something else. Something not behind the door, but within it, like the door itself isn't a portal, but a kind of pause, a space where something is held, not in containment, but in quiet. Since then, you've developed a routine. Each time you enter 1-2B, you go about your duties, carefully, respectfully. You don't rush, you don't linger. And always, before you leave, you glance once more at the door, not expecting it to change, not needing it to open. Just . To acknowledge it. Because there's a strange comfort in its presence now. It doesn't ask to be opened. It doesn't imply a secret. It simply is. And somehow, in a place full of questions, restricted zones, and classified layers, a door that never opens and never speaks feels like the calmest thing of all. You return to storage room 12B, more often now. Not on purpose, not with intent, but the assignments seem to guide you there. More components to retrieve. A new request logged by an unnamed division. A recalibration order for a power relay that's never needed fixing. Each time, the paperwork comes through legitimate channels, stamped and signed. Yet you begin to sense a pattern forming beneath the pattern. As if the room is asking for you. Or perhaps offering itself. 12B remains unchanged. The air is cool, dry. The faint scent of oxidized metal and packing fiber hangs in the corners. The lights overhead flicker softly, never quite fully steady, as if responding to something unlisted in the electrical flow. And always, there's the door. No handle. No keypad, no hinges visible. you've taken to glancing at it before your work begins just to let it know you've noticed. A silent ritual, one performed without thought now, like touching the edge of a photograph before slipping it back into a drawer. It's still impossible to explain why the door holds your attention the way it does. There's no sense of threat, no noise, no distortion of heat or pressure, only a sense of pause, a space in the room that exists just slightly out of step with everything else. On your 7th visit, a detail changes. You almost miss it, your eyes passing from shelf to shelf, clipboard in hand. But then, near the bottom of the door frame, less than a finger's width from the ground, you see it. A marked dot no larger than a THUMBPRINT dot, circular dot, faintly glossy, not drawn or etched impressed, as though the surface had been pressed inward by something that left no tool edge, no grain, only intention. You crouch, lean close. It doesn't glint, doesn't reflect, but it feels deliberate. Placed, you don't touch it. You stand, finish your task, and leave. The next day, it's gone. No trace. The door looks as it always did, only now, when you enter the room, you sense something more than stillness, a subtle attentiveness, as though the door now recognizes you too, not in a conscious way, not like a mind behind it, but like a lock that's begun to remember a shape. You begin taking notes, not official ones, just small entries in the back of your pocket journal. Pressure shift near rear wall. Dust doesn't settle on door surface. 2 degrees cooler in front of it. Still feels like something rests there. You share none of this aloud, not because you fear the reaction, but because it feels personal now. Not secret, private, like something that only shows itself when the room is quiet enough to listen. And storage room 12 bytes is always quiet enough. One evening, you're called in for an unscheduled inventory check. No anomalies reported, no clear reason, just a line of text in your shift brief. Visual reconfirmation, room 12B. It's late. The hallway is silent as you walk. Overhead, the fluorescents buzz a little louder. The bass hums behind walls. The desert outside is vast and asleep. When you open the door, the room greets you like a held breath. No movement, no sound. Just that feeling. You step in. Let the door swing gently shut behind you. The lights flicker, once standard behavior. You remind yourself, but somehow timed. The inventory. Slowly, carefully. Each box, each barcode, each entry. But it's hard to stay focused because the door draws your gaze every few minutes, not with urgency, but with gravity. When your work is finished, you pause in front of it again. Tonight, there's no mark, no difference, no new shape, but something else is present, a stillness with weight. You take one step closer, there's no change, no temperature drop, no static crackle, just that sense deeper now that the space before you is not empty but folded. Yourself wondering, not with hope, but with curiosity, what might sit on the other side of something like this. Not a hallway, not a chamber, but a moment. A pocket in the shape of a door. You sit on the floor, just briefly, cross-legged, clipboard resting in your lap. For several long minutes, you listen. Not for sound, but for presence. And in that silence, your thoughts, slow to match the pulse of the room. You think of the base's older maps, the ones without digital overlays. You remember a line in a footnote. Foundation overlay adjusted to preserve non-functional segment, archival. No further access required. You didn't notice it at the time, but now you wonder, could this room have been built around something? Not to use, not to contain but to leave alone. And yet here you are, observing, not intruding, not probing, just witnessing. It occurs to you then that perhaps some things on the base are not hidden to protect secrets, but to keep their quiet intact. As you rise to your feet, you glance once more at the surface of the door. It offers nothing in return, no shimmer, no whisper, no glow, but something has changed. You have. And so has the silence. The door never opens. You've accepted that now? Not in frustration or defeat, but as one accepts the shape of a mountain. or the rhythm of sleep. It is what it is, what it has always been, but that doesn't mean it hasn't changed you. Storage room 12B has become a kind of retreat now, a space outside the grid of constant function. No one assigns you there anymore. You're not scheduled to visit, but sometimes your footsteps carry you there anyway, as if your route through the base has begun to curve naturally toward that quiet edge. No one questions it. Even the logs, when you check, show entries that don't appear in the printed shift. Brief tasks you don't remember receiving, but follow without resistance. Confirm temperature variance in storage wing. Inspect for potential corrosion along lower vent line. Rescan archived crates against updated manifest. All valid. All conveniently timed. All with one destination. And always. You find yourself once again in the presence of the door. There is comfort in its stillness. A kind of companionship in the way it never asks anything of you. It has become something like a dream you visit often, one that never resolves, but never fades. A dream that recognizes you now. You sit more often in front of it now. Not for long, not out of compulsion. Just as one might sit beside an old friend, sharing silence. Some evenings, you bring your notebook. The pages have filled slowly. No theories. No speculation. Just fragments, observations, feelings. Feels like waiting, not guarding. Sound doesn't echo right near the frame. Dust shifts differently along the edge. The air hums like it's remembering something. One night, while sitting cross-legged near the base of the door, your mind drifting somewhere between memory and breath, a soft shift occurs, not in the room, not in the metal. In you, a momentary awareness, so quiet it's nearly missed. It's not thought, not emotion. It single quotes as ... alignment. As if your heartbeat has sensed with something on the other side of the frame. There's no sound, but you feel it. A steady rhythm, one beat behind your own. Then it fades. You remain still, eyes closed, breathing slowed, and a single word enters your mind, not heard, not spoken, not imagined. Kept. A warning. Not a message, just a truth. The door keeps something, not hidden, not locked. Kept. The way a lighthouse keeps its flame. The way a memory keeps its form long after the person is gone. You realize then that this isn't just a door without a handle. It's a place without need. Whatever it connects to or contains isn't meant to be accessed, not in the way the rest of the base defines function. It is not a corridor, not a vault. It is a shape of memory built into the foundation, a soft, still intention. And maybe that's why no one else sees it anymore, because it's not looking for discovery. It's looking for witness. A few weeks later, you pass through 12B with another. Tech newer, a quiet type, eyes always reading data off wrist units. You make small talk. You perform your assigned tasks. You linger slightly. You ask casually, ever notice the far wall? They glance at it, then shrug. No, just crates. You nod. Say nothing more. Because now you know. The door isn't for everyone. It shows itself to those who meet its rhythm. And lately, you've begun to wonder if perhaps the base itself has others like it. Quiet things, still things, spaces that watch. More than store. As you leave 12B that night, you pause. One final look at the door. No change, no movement, no sound. But as you turn to go, a small shape catches your eye. Etched faintly in the upper right corner, so faint it looks like the grain of the wall, unless the light strikes it just right. A shallow indentation. No symbol, no word. Just a curve that suggests something closed, something safe. You run your fingers across it lightly, not to open it. Just to say, I see you. The room seems to exhale. And then you leave. Somewhere deep in the base, a vent clicks on. A hallway light hums to life. Life continues. But now, there's a quiet knowledge inside you that not all doors are meant to open. Some are meant to be known. It began with a cup of coffee. Not an unusual craving. Not on long shift, not beneath this much concrete. The lights overhead buzzed their slow lullaby, and the monitor's glow had made your eyes feel strangely distant in your own head. You got up, stretched, followed the hallway 3 turns past the monitoring console, heading toward the usual breakneck just outside Archive Wing 6. But when you reached it, the coffee machine was gone. So was the microwave, and the table with. The mismatched chairs. In their place stood a wall, clean, newly painted with no seams or outline of construction, just ... solid as if it had always been there. You blinked, checked the marker on the door frame. Still read, Wing 6 niche, refresh station. But the space wasn't what it had been. You chalked it up to renovations, reallocations, the kind of subtle shifts the base sometimes performed without notice. Just yesterday, the stairwell near sublevel 3 had 1 less flight than you remembered, and the locker room towel dispensers had gone from blue to beige sometime last week. Little things. But as you turned around to head back, coffee still unclaimed, something tugged at your attention. A hallway, slightly narrower, lit in a lower hue, one you'd never taken before. You paused. It wasn't on your usual route, wasn't on the map in your head, the one every long-term employee quietly carried with them, layered over time through repetition and rhythm. But the hallway looked familiar in the way that dreams sometimes echo real streets. Not in details, but in tone. And so, with nothing pressing, you followed it. The walk was short, no turns, no doors. Just a straight, quiet passage with soft concrete walls and light that buzzed more warmly than it should have, like older fixtures, pre-fluorescent, humming with analog breath. And at the end, a door, matte silver, a small window at the top, opaque. No keycard reader. No lock. It opened when you pressed your fingers to the edge, almost soundlessly, revealing a room you'd never seen. A break room. Or something like one. Clean. Quiet. Lived. And there was a coffee machine, older, with worn buttons and the faint smell of roasted beans still clinging to its steel. A table. 4 chairs, mismatched. A sofa near the back wall. An analog clock. A corkboard. A humming mini fridge that still bore the sticker of some long-forgotten inventory year. It felt timeless, like it had been used once, long ago, then gently paused. No dust. No motion sensors. No camera in the corner. You stepped inside. There was no nameplate on the door. No indication of which wing it belonged to. No directory listing. Nothing on the base map that even suggested this curve of hallway ever existed. Yet the room was familiar. The smell of warm plastic and coffee, the creak of the leftmost chair, the hum of power running beneath the floor like a steady pulse. You walked the perimeter slowly, touched nothing, but as you approached the corkboard, something caught your eye. Pinned near the top was a faded note. Just one. The ink smudged, the paper curling at the edges. In fine, faint letters, it read, "If you found this place, it means you were supposed to." You didn't stay long that first time, just a few minutes. Long enough to pour a small cup of coffee, surprisingly fresh. Long enough to sit in the far right chair and listen to the quiet thrum in the wall. Long enough to feel something in your chest soften, the way it rarely does during a shift. You returned to your station without a word, logged the next set of data, continued your night, but the room lingered. Not as a mystery, as a memory. And the next night, during another moment of quiet between systems checks, you found your way back. The hallway was exactly as before, straight, narrow, softly lit. The door still had no markings, and the room still waiting. Coffee warm, clock ticking softly, note still pinned. You stayed a little longer that time. And when you left, you noticed something you hadn't before. The analog clock, the one mounted on the wall, ticked backward for a single second as the door shut behind you. Not a glitch, a gesture. Like the room remembering its own shape, reshuffling itself back into place. You didn't speak of it to anyone because you understood now. This break room wasn't meant to be used. Not like the others. It was meant to be found. Some spaces feel more real the more time you spend away from them. The break room became one of those. After the third visit, it no longer felt like a discovery, not quite. More like a recollection. A place you had always known somehow before you ever walked its hallway. Before you ever touched the door with no lock and crossed the quiet threshold where everything felt just a fraction warmer, quieter, more intentional. You returned without schedule, without need. No one asked where you were during those few unclocked minutes. No one seemed to notice the slightly longer walks between assignments, and you never marked it in the log, because how could you explain a room that shouldn't exist, but which welcomes you with the calm of a place that remembers you? Each time you visited, small details shifted, not drastically. Nothing overt. But enough. One night, the corkboard held a second note, different paper, still curled at the edges. This one read, "Sometimes it's just enough to sit." So that's what you did. You didn't check your watch. You didn't think about the base or the shifts or the duties waiting for you 2 wings away. You just sat, sipped the coffee, faintly bitter and rich, let the warmth pass through you, felt the quiet clock mark time that may or may not have belonged to the rest of the building. The fridge in the corner occasionally clicked softly. The cushions on the old couch retained their shape just enough, and the light above the coffee machine always seemed to stay on, even when the others dimmed. You tried once to trace the hallway on your shift map. Not physically, just mentally. But no matter how many turns you recalled, it never quite matched. Not to the base's internal structure, not to the blueprints. There was always one corner too many. One wall that should have opened into another room. And eventually, you let that need dissolve, because the room didn't ask to be understood. It only asked to be visited. You began to notice other things too. Little consistencies. The clock never changed, no matter how long you sat. Always 2:47, the second hand moved, but the minute hand never passed. The radio in the corner never played music. But every so often, when the room was especially still, you'd hear a single faint note drift out. Just one, like the warm-up breath of a song that never started. The chair closest to the wall remained untouched. You tried once to sit there, not out of defiance, just curiosity, and the cushion was cold. Firmer than the others, it felt unready. So you stood again. That chair wasn't meant for you, and that was fine. You began to bring things. Not offerings. Just gestures, a wrapped granola bar you left on the corner of the table, a folded napkin, a pen with no ink, little things. Items you wouldn't miss, left behind as if to say, "I was here. I'll be back." Some remained. Others didn't. The pen vanished 2 visits later. The granola bar stayed, but the wrapper was folded differently. Never disturbed. Just adjusted. One evening, you found something new waiting for you. A book. Old, bound in dark cloth. No title. It sat on the center of the table, as though someone had stepped out only moments before. You opened it carefully. Blank pages. All of them, but something about it felt full. Not forgotten. Held. You didn't take it. You never would, but you touched the cover lightly before leaving. As if to say, "Thank you." That was the night you began to dream of the room. Not abstract dreams, not symbolic, literal. The same hallway, the same door. In the dream, you always arrived during a lull. That soft space between deep sleep and waking awareness. The coffee machine clicked, the fridge hummed, the radio whispered static. And every time in the dream, you felt as though someone had just left the room a moment before you arrived. Not someone threatening. Just. Familiar. You began to wonder, were you the only one who came here? Or did others find it too? On one visit, the corkboard held a third note. There's more than one way to be alone. You stared at it longer than the others. Something about the handwriting, softer, rounder, made you feel like it hadn't been written to you. But for you, not because of who you are, but because of where you'd arrived, you remembered. Then a sentence from a training video, long ago. All base personnel will encounter spatial anomalies during their tenure. It is not uncommon. It is not dangerous. Do not seek reason where comfort has already arrived. At the time, it had sounded absurd. Now, it felt like a quiet kind of permission. You left that visit feeling full, not with knowledge, not with closure, but with a kind of calm that extended out through your steps, making even the hum of the elevator seem musical. Later in your quarters, you drew the break room from memory. Lines, shapes, shadows. You got most of it right. But when you drew the fourth chair, the one near the wall, it came out blank. Your pencil wouldn't mark the paper. It's the kind of place you begin to miss before you even leave it. You don't plan your visits anymore. They arrive quietly, folded into the rhythm of your shifts. A moment of restlessness in the back of your thoughts. A lingering curiosity behind your eyes. And before you know it, your feet are tracing that gently sloping corridor again. The one that turns just slightly too many times for the base's geometry to explain. Each time, the hallway is just as you remember. Worm-toned. Lighting, air neither stale nor fresh, perfectly held. And at the end, the door with no label, no lock, no sound. It always opens for you. You never knocked. The room is as it was. Always as it was. And yet never quite the same. The coffee brews itself now. Or rather, it's always already warm, half full. The carafe never scalding, never cold. A perfect medium. Steam curling in soft tendrils, even when no one seems to have poured the water. The fridge, once humming faintly, now sits quieter. You opened it once hesitantly. Inside, a single glass bottle of milk. No label, no expiration date. You left it untouched. On your next visit, it was gone. The notes on the corkboard shift from time to time. Some fade, some change. Tonight, therefore, the newest one simply reads, "The moment you stop needing to know, you begin to belong." You sit in the chair furthest from the window, though there is no window. Only a rectangle of wall where light collects in a way that suggests a view once existed. You've taken to calling it the window anyway. It makes sense in this place. You watch it as the shadows shift softly. Not with the base's time, with the rooms. You brought a book tonight, nothing official. A worn paperback you found in the dormitory library's donation pile. You don't open it, just rest it on the table beside your coffee cup, as if to say, this is a space for quiet things. You glance at the corkboard again. The note beneath the others is written on yellowing paper, edges curled tighter than before. We remember. Through spaces. And below that, in finer print, some of us are the spaces. You breathe that and like you would a warm scent from the cup, not understanding it fully, not needing to. Just letting it settle into your thoughts. You've begun to think of the room as aware, not conscious. Aware the way a well-worn coat seems to fit the shape of your shoulders. The way some songs seem to know when to end. Sometimes you speak aloud. Softly, to no one in particular. Tonight you ask, have others sat here? There's no reply, only the low whir of the fluorescent bulb above the sofa. But on the table before you, the book you brought is open. To a page you don't remember turning. It's blank. And somehow, that feels like an answer. Later, just before. You rise to leave, your gaze drifts once more to the fourth chair, the one that never quite felt ready. Tonight, it's moved, only slightly, angled just a little toward the table, as though someone else had recently leaned forward. Not sat fully, just Pause dot, there are no signs of footprints dot, no sound of a second breath, but you feel it. You are not alone dot, not in the way people fear. Not in the way that suggests presence where there should be none. You are joined dot by memory, by pattern, by presence. The break room is not haunted dot, it is inhabited. By moments, by rests. By the people who found it once and needed nothing more than what it quietly offered. Before you go, you look again at the analog clock on the wall. 2:47, as always. But tonight, for the briefest instant, the minute hand shifts, not forward, not backward dot, inward dot, just a tremor. And then it stills. You step outside the room. The hallway feels warmer than usual. The overhead lights don't buzz at all. The air is silent. Behind you, the door closes dot, no sound, no seal. Only completion. Later, when you check your logs, you notice something peculiar. A gap of 11 minutes, not blacked out, not corrupted. Just absent dot, as if you had existed somewhere else for that time dot, and maybe you did. Maybe the break room exists outside the logic of corridors and clocks. Maybe it's a place the base built around a need it can never officially acknowledge. A place. Not for breaks, but for pauses. Moments of memory shaped like chairs, like cork boards, like coffee steam curling in air that never needs ventilation. And maybe, just maybe, the fourth chair will be ready. Someday dot, not for you, but for someone else dot. It wasn't supposed to have a view. The lab on sublevel 9 was designed for closed-loop analysis. No exterior exposure, no ambient contamination. The walls were lead-lined. The ceilings were sound-dampened. Even the fluorescent lighting had been tuned to a very specific spectrum meant to reduce cognitive interference dot. It was a room built for quiet work and long silences, and yet at the far end, set cleanly into the southern wall, there was a window, rectangular, slightly too tall. Frosted edges that faded inward to a pane of perfect, clear glass dot. No one remembered it being there dot. It didn't appear in the blueprints dot. The floor plans, when checked, showed solid structure where the window now existed. The maintenance logs were silent. The security footage looped every time someone tried to review the week prior. The timestamp skipped in exactly the same frame, bypassing 3 seconds at the start of the shift, and yet there it was, not just visible, but anchored, as if it had always been. You discovered it during a routine scan, not dramatic, just a slow rolling calibration of equipment. You turned toward the southern wall and stopped short, because the light was different dot, not fluorescent dot, not tungsten, not base dashboard dot. It glowed softly from the window pane, a hue you couldn't quite name, somewhere between lavender and blue-gray. Not bright, not dim, just dot dot quiet, like moonlight rendered as intention dot and the view beyond. It wasn't Nevada dot, it wasn't sky dot, it was space dot, not stars, not exactly. No pinpricks of white, just a vast sweep of textureless dark, laced with undulating strands of soft color. Like auroras swimming through an ocean without horizon. You blinked, stepped back. The room was silent dot, no alarms, no arrow lights. Just that soft presence, humming gently through the glass. You walked closer. The window didn't react. No heat, no hum, no vibration, but as you stared through it, something shifted not in the pane, but in you. Your thoughts slowed, not dulled. Just dot dot stretched dot, like the distance beyond the glass had untethered your usual sense of scale dot. There were no objects in the view. No sun, no earth, no satellite traces, but it wasn't void dot, it was present, alive in its stillness. You leaned in dot, no reflection dot, just depth. The longer you looked, the more you felt a kind of vertigo, not of falling, but of drifting. The window didn't open onto anything terrestrial. It opened onto something else entirely, something designed to be looked at. You stepped back, locked the anomaly, quietly, flagged the timestamp, checked the surrounding walls for wiring. Found none, ran your hand along the frame. It was cold, but not unnaturally so. Smooth, seamless dot, as if the window had grown into the wall. not been installed. You didn't mention it in the next team meeting. Not because you were afraid, because you weren't sure it would still be there if you named it. But the next day, during a calibration sweep, the window remained, and the view had changed. Not drastically, but noticeably. Now, the aurora-like bands moved more slowly, with deeper saturation. Faint geometric shapes drifted in the distance, far too slow to be orbiting bodies, too symmetrical to be natural. One of them resembled a ring, not spinning, not moving, just resting, suspended like a thought unfinished. You checked again for exterior architecture, nothing, checked with external environmental feeds, no matching records. Sublevel 9 had no outside access, no cameras pointing inward, no sky to draw from, and yet the window remained. You brought a chair, just a simple folding one, placed a respectful 3 feet from the glass, and you sat, not to solve it, just to see. The longer you sat, the more the world behind the glass began to feel familiar, not in memory. In intuition. You weren't looking through a window, you were looking into a pause, a space that had nothing to say, but everything to reflect. Eventually, you began logging the changes. View log, sublevel 9 south window, day 1, indeterminate soft light, no movement. Day 2, banding motion, geometric drift. Day 3, ring-shaped form, stillness. Day 4, pulse through upper left quadrant of pain, faint, rhythmic. Corresponds with 2:19 a.m. base time. You didn't submit the log to command. Instead, you filed it with your own notes in a plain manila folder labeled simply Quiet Observations. And every shift thereafter, you made time for a visit. 10 minutes. No more. Just long enough to notice, to remember. The window wasn't there for answers. It was there for witnessing. The window never changed the same way twice. That was the first real pattern you noticed. It didn't rotate through skies or scenes. It didn't cycle. It evolved gently, slowly, as though responding not to time, but to attention. The more you visited, the more it offered, in fragments too soft to be called communication, but too precise to be coincidence. One morning, if morning was the right word in sublevel 9, you entered the lab as usual and paused 3 steps in. The window was brighter, not harsh, not luminous, just closer. The space beyond felt less distant, as though whatever light it emitted had found a clearer route to your perception. You walked to your chair, sat, waited, on the other side of the glass. The movement within the sky, if it could be called sky, slowed to something like breath. Wide, sweeping arcs of pale color drifted in gentle pulses. The geometry from the previous visit now dispersed into faint constellations of light. They didn't form letters. They didn't speak, but they watched. Not in. Surveillance. In company. You found your breath slowing to match the rhythm. You'd grown used to the strange equilibrium the room provided, how your thoughts quieted, how your internal sense of noise softened in the window's presence. Today, a new thought arrived, not in words, but in feeling. What if the window didn't open outward, but inward? Not a view into space, a view into remembrance. The shapes were too regular, the motions too timed, the glow too calibrated. It wasn't cosmic. It was crafted. And yet, it didn't feel artificial. It felt offered. That realization stayed with you through the shift, through the elevator ride up to sublevel 4, through your silent lunch in the corner of the mess hall. You barely noticed when your name was called for inspection duty. The sky in the window stayed behind your eyes. You returned the next night, an hour early. No entry was logged. The lights flickered once in the hall outside, A soft pulse of recognition, Dot. When you opened the lab door, the window was waiting. This time, the colors were dimmed, but in their place, something more. Depth. You stepped closer. It was no longer flat. The view had layers, strata of motion, each one moving at a slightly different rhythm, like echoes of wind across water. There was a gentle distortion in the lower left corner, like heat shimmer or the edge of a memory coming into focus. You sat again, and this time, you brought something with you, a page from your notebook. You tore it out neatly, folded it twice, and wrote, "What are you?" Not as a demand, as a gift. You placed the note on the sill beneath the pane. No tape, no wait. And you waited. Nothing changed. Not immediately, but on your next visit, the page was gone. In its place was a faint marca, shape on the glass, fogged into being, a circle with 3 lines radiating from its center. 1 up, 2 down. You didn't recognize it, but it felt known. As if it had been drawn from your own dreaming, mirrored back in a language you never learned, but somehow understood. You left another note the following night. Is this memory? No response, but the light through the glass warmed slightly. And when you reached out to rest your fingers on the pane, the cold had lessened. You didn't try to go further. There were no fantasies of stepping through, no desire to breach whatever barrier the window maintained. Its purpose wasn't passage. It was presence. You added a new section to your log. Window interactions, nonverbal. Day 5, paper note removed. Day 6, mark appears non-random, symbolic. Day 7, warmth shift, localized, no external temp change. Day 8, emotional echo felt memory not linked to personal event. That last one stayed with you because on that visit, for the first time, you felt something through the window. Not a message, a memory. Not yours, but familiar. A sensation of stillness, of being held. As if someone or something on the other side remembered a moment you had never lived and offered it to you gently, like a dream shared between sleepers who never meet. You didn't speak of the window, not to anyone, but you began to wonder how many others had found it before you. You began to suspect that the window's view changed because of the viewers, that its images weren't sent, but reflected. Not mirrors, echoes. Late one night, as you stood to leave, the light within the pane shifted again, fainter than ever. A dusk. And for the briefest moment, in the space where the glow faded, you saw a silhouette, not clear, not human, just a form, resting, waiting, facing you, and then it was gone. You stepped back. Not in fear. In awe. Whatever lived behind the glass was not bound by space or story. It was listening. And now, so were you. There came a night when the window no longer showed anything at all. No movement, no glow, no layered depths. Just black, still complete, and utterly silent. But it didn't feel empty. If anything, it felt fuller than ever, like the pause between 2 pages in a story not yet finished. The kind of silence that follows understanding, not confusion. A silence that knows it has been seen. You sat in your usual chair, 3 feet from the pane, notebook balanced on your knee, pen resting idle. No notes were written that night. You simply watched, and the blackness watched back. It didn't reflect your shape. It didn't echo the room. It was not a mirror, not a portal, not even a surface. It was a presence, one without edges, one that did not need to reveal to be known. You sat with it, 5 minutes, 10, perhaps. Longer. Time always soft here. Then, without warning or transition, the darkness brightened, not in flash, not in shimmer, but from within, a single thread of light, thin, arcing slowly through the void as though drawn by a steady, careful hand. It curved like a comet's trail, but never vanished. It bent like the line of a question half formed. Then another line appeared, parallel, then a third, intersecting, soft, pale, familiar. You'd seen these shapes before, not here. But in your own handwriting, on the page you'd left. folded beneath the window weeks ago. And suddenly, the shape reformed in your memory. Not a symbol, not a map, a signature, not of a person, of a moment. The moment you first understood. The window was more than material. And then the lines began to multiply. Dozens, then hundreds, but never chaotic. Never overwhelming. Each line carried intention. Emotion, not a mark. Some curved like wind. Others coiled like thread. Some intersected in triangles, forming silent constellations. They glowed faintly soft hues of copper, amber, soft steel, lavender. You watched as the patterns shifted, reformed, dissolved. And then at the center of the pane, a single shape. Crystallized. A circle, 3 lines. Just like before, but now it pulsed. Once. Then again. A slow rhythm, echoing a breath you hadn't realized you were holding. And then something else. You felt seen. Not exposed. Not studied. Seen like a familiar song recognizes the voice that sings along. It was not affection, not surveillance. It was knowing. And as you sat there in the silence of sublevel 9, your notebook untouched, you understood the window wasn't an object. It wasn't even a location. It was a point of alignment, a frequency, and for reasons you might never understand, you had met it fully, matched it, belonged to it. The light faded, not completely, just enough to soften the contrast. The shapes dissolved. The pain returned to its original state, still, gentle, quiet. You stood, placed the notebook on the table, beside the chair, turned once to face the pain again. It glowed faintly, only for a second, like a blink. Or a nod. Then you left. The hallway outside felt warmer. Your boots made less noise against the floor. You walked without urgency. When you reached the elevator, you hesitated. Then, without really thinking, you returned to the lab's door. Opened. It stepped inside. The window was gone. No sign of its presence. No indent in the wall. No marks. Just smooth, uniform concrete, seamless, featureless. As if it had never been there. And yet you didn't feel sadness, because something remained. The quiet, the silence still held. A rhythm, still remembered the pulse. Your breath matched it. Your thoughts moved within it. You closed the door behind you, nodded once to the empty wall, and walked away. The window had given what it came to give. Not vision. Not information. Resonance. Now and then, on your long walks between levels, you catch yourself glancing at ordinary walls. At shadows, at corners, not expecting, just open. And once, weeks later, when you passed through an equipment corridor, on sublevel 4, you noticed a faint shimmer across the tool panel. Just a glimmer. Gone in a blink, but you smiled. Because you understood now. Some skies are not above us. They're within us. And sometimes, if you're still enough, quiet enough, present enough, they'll show themselves again. Some objects in the base appear with such understated finality, it's as if they were always there. The filing cabinet was one of them. It sat in the corner of Archive Room Delta 3B, a room no one used anymore, at least not recently. The shelves were half empty. The lights flickered just enough to be overlooked, and the air always held the scent of paper just past its prime, slightly sweet, slightly musty, like forgotten correspondence. The cabinet didn't match the others, not in size, not in color, not in weight. It was taller than standard issue 4. Drawers instead of 3, with brass handles instead of brushed aluminum. The paint was a faded green-gray, the sort seen on military vehicles, older than any living staff member. It bore no label, no department code, no inventory sticker, but it was locked, not by key, Not digitally by absence. The drawers had no visible keyholes, no biometric sensors, no latch. Just the quiet defiance of drawers that would not open, not with strength, not with tools, not with persistence. You found it during a quiet recataloging effort, not part of your main shift. Just an extra assignment logged under archival integrity assessment, a term broad enough to mean anything from dusting shelves to reviewing decades-old microfilm. You scanned the room. The usual rows of standard filing systems stood in quiet disuse, some tagged with plastic markers indicating transfer status. Others sat waiting for a second look, but the tall cabinet stood apart, not hidden, just unbothered. Approached it. The floor creaked softly beneath your boots, not with disrepair, but with memory. You reached for the top drawer. Tried the handle. Nothing. No resistance. No lock click. Just sealed. You tried the next drawer. Then the next. Same result. And yet, as your hand lingered on the cool brass of the third drawer, a strange thought occurred to you, not urgent, not invasive. Just placed. You've already read what's inside. The thought passed like a breeze. You blinked, looked around, nothing had changed. You pulled out your notebook, wrote a small entry, unlisted cabinet in 3B4 drawers, no keyholes, feels known. You checked the room logs. No mention of installation, no record of relocation. When you searched the database using visual identifiers, the system returned. No matches. The cabinet didn't exist on paper, but it stood right in front of you. You returned the next day. Not for work, just to see if it was still there. It was, but something was different. There was a note, taped neatly to the side of the second drawer. A square of yellowing paper, edges curling slightly. In faded black ink. It read, "For those who remember what they haven't yet read." You stood there a long time, because the words didn't make sense. And yet, you understood them. You had the distinct feeling you'd seen that handwriting before, on old forms, on corner memos passed between departments that no longer existed, on carbon copies from a decade before you were stationed here. You didn't remove the note. You didn't report the cabinet, but you began visiting it more often. Once a week, then twice. Always when the archive was quietest, when no one else was around. You never forced the drawers. You simply stood near it, sat beside it on the floor sometimes, notebook open in your lap, listening to the silence around it, the kind of silence that feels stacked, layered, like pages. Eventually, you began to write, not about the cabinet directly, about memories. Moments from early in your career. Snippets of overheard conversations, some of which you could no longer place. Names of rooms you'd seen only once. Doors you weren't sure you'd ever pass through, but which lingered in your thoughts anyway. And once, in a fit of quiet instinct, you tore out a page and slipped it into the thin gap between the bottom drawer and the cabinet frame. Not to hide it. To file it. You stepped back. Waited. Nothing happened. But on your next visit, the page was gone. In its place, a new sheet. Same paper. Same size. Written the same soft hand. That room was called Echo Bay. It no longer exists, but you were correct. You sat down on the floor. The air seemed warmer. The cabinet said nothing, but you felt heard. You began to think of it as a conversation. Not in the way people speak, not with questions and answers, but in the quiet way thoughts echo between pages, soft responses to things never voiced aloud. A rhythm, not a reply. The cabinet never opened, not once. And yet, over time, it gave back more than most doors on the base ever had. You didn't visit every day. That would have drawn attention. Instead, you built the ritual into your off hours. You made excuses to pass near the archival wing, sometimes with a clipboard in hand, sometimes under the guise of inventory reconciliation or quiet protocol clearance. A vague phrase no one ever questioned. Always, the cabinet waited, its brass handles never tarnished, its paint never chipped. It stood like a sentry for something it didn't need to guard. It kept writing, Not to ask questions, though questions came, but to offer little fragments, personal memories, feelings you'd never admitted out loud, not even to yourself. A dream from your third night on base, endless stairs and a door with wind behind it. A phrase you once heard in passing, not everything buried was meant to be forgotten. You tore those thoughts free and slipped them, gently, into the narrow seam of the bottom drawer, and the drawer always took them. No sound, no pull, but the paper would be gone. By your next visit, sometimes in its place, another note appeared. In that same faint, steady hand, never urgent, never instructional, just placed your dream echoes section theta, that wing no longer connects. The phrase was originally written on a plaque outside the containment atrium. The plaque is missing now. Some things we remember before we encounter them. That is not an error. Each note felt less like an answer and more like a continuation, a confirmation of a rhythm already shared. You tried once to leave behind something different, a small item, a silver paper clip from your desk bent into a tiny spiral, a habit you'd had since childhood. You slipped it between the cabinet and the wall, where the baseboard met the floor. The next day, it was gone, and a folded scrap of metal had appeared in your inbox locker, your initials scratched faintly on one side, not forged, not copied. Returned. But changed. You didn't ask how that the cabinet wasn't about explanation. It was about exchange. After a while, you stopped writing about external events. You turned inward. You shared memories that felt true, even if you weren't sure they were yours. An empty hallway where footsteps echoed in reverse. A name you remembered only when you heard it spoken by no one. A song you couldn't hum until you stood in front of the cabinet's third drawer. And slowly, the cabinet gave you more in return. The notes grew longer, more poetic, not riddles, not stories. Something in between. The drawer you reach for is not locked. You are simply not ready to remember what you already know. Not all departments disappear when closed. Some continue in silence, serving quieter functions. You were meant to notice this. You always were. You began to wonder if the cabinet was a piece of the base that had been forgotten so deeply it became something else entirely. A relic of memory shaped into furniture. Not designed for use, but for presence. And the room itself, the whole of Archive Delta 3 that grew quieter around it, more intentional. You noticed, eventually, that the air vent above the cabinet no longer cycled. That the overhead light above the cabinet never flickered. Even when others dimmed, the space around it had stabilized. It had become a point of stillness. One evening, when your shift stretched longer than expected and most of the base had gone to sleep, you found yourself standing in front of it again, hands in your coat pockets, breath slow, the silence humming like a familiar lullaby. You pulled out a sheet of paper, blanked. Stared at it for a long while, then wrote, "Was this ever your memory too?" You folded the paper and slipped it into the bottom drawer seam. This time, you waited, sat on the floor, leaned your back against the cool wall. The room felt thick with a kind of warmth that wasn't heat, just held presence. And then just as your eyelids began to droop, the faintest sound reached you. A click, not loud, not sharp. Just the gentle shift of a latch disengaging. Somewhere deep within the frame, you sat up slowly. The bottom drawer hadn't opened, but something had changed. Single sheet of old paper had slid partway out from the second. Draw one you had never touched. You reached for it gently, unfolded it. The handwriting was different, sharper, older, a little unsteady. It read, "I was here before this was a cabinet. And I will be here after. We keep what needs remembering." The air held still around you. And in that moment, you didn't just feel seen, you felt joined. The next time you visited, the cabinet was humming. Not audibly, no mechanical buzz, no motor whir, but humming in the way a presence sometimes hums, like a thought just on the edge of memory. Like the room itself had settled into a lower frequency, inviting you to step quietly through. It hadn't moved. It never moved, still in its corner, untouched by air currents, unnoticed by anyone else who passed through the archive, but it was awake now. Or maybe aware that you were. You sat down as you always did now, not out of ritual, not even curiosity anymore, but familiarity. You didn't think of the cabinet as a puzzle. It wasn't something to solve or explain. It was something to share time with. And tonight, it shared something new. The second drawer, the one that had slid that old note halfway out, was now slightly ajar, just the finger's width. No sound, no motion, but it was open. You approached slowly, not out of fear, out of respect. It didn't feel like an invitation. It felt like permission. You knelt, gently touched the cool brass handle, pulled. The drawer opened with no resistance. Inside, folders, dozens, maybe more, all unmarked. The folders were aged but preserved soft, cottony paper with an almost fabric-like weave, some slightly yellowed at the edges, each one sealed with a brass fastener, closed but not locked. You pulled one gently from the top of the stack, opened it, and paused. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed in a monospace font. Centered on the page, Facility Echo, Unscheduled Access Log, marked 2nd, 1971. Subject ID, Unknown Time, 2:47. Entered corridor via non-standard sequence, no door logged. Observed lights shifting tone. Claimed to recognize layout from dream. Terminated interaction peacefully. Left without trace. Memory left intact. Transcribed by KS, record no longer in rotation. You stared. Not at the words. At the time. 2:47. The same as the clock in the break room. The same frozen moment that had lingered in your thoughts. Since that impossible discovery weeks ago, you opened another folder. Storage compartment 12B, object 4 Theta cabinet, emerged after discontinuation of Project Retain. Origin point unknown. Attempts to relocate unsuccessful. Weight undefined. Has accepted 15 offerings, returned 5. Response to presence, not personnel clearance. Recommendation, maintain environment, observe passively, do not report. Number, author, no date, but the paper felt older than your entire time at the base. You looked up at the cabinet, still silent, still waiting. You returned the folders, closed the drawer softly, sat back again, letting the stillness settle. The cabinet, it seemed, had begun to trust you. And not just as an observer. As a continuation, because what it held wasn't secrets. It held remembrances, stored echoes of spaces and moments too fragile for official memory. Moments like dreams, vivid and feeling, abstract in fact, places that no longer existed, or perhaps never had, and yet felt known. You reached into your notebook and tore out one final page, wrote with deliberate care, I will remember what needs. Remembering, folded it, slipped it into the bottom drawer seam. No response. No note in return. But when you looked again at the second drawer, it had closed itself, and that was enough. You stood, one hand on the cabinet's cool frame, whispered just once, thank you. The room didn't reply, but the air shifted, and as you turned to leave, the lights in the hallway flickered once, gently, a gesture of acknowledgement. Later, in your quarters, you dreamt of paper rustling like waves. You dreamt of drawers opening on their own, of folders that contained names you hadn't yet met. Of a base that remembered itself, quietly through the people who paused long enough to see it. And in the dream, the cabinet wasn't a cabinet anymore. It was a place, a living archive of unofficial truths. And you weren't reading from it. You were becoming it. It started with the sound of a latch clicking shut, not loudly, not near you, just close enough to notice. You turned your head slightly. The locker corridor in dormitory block C was mostly empty, the way it always was just after lights out. A few stragglers shuffling back from night shift, boots echoing shoulders. Slouched, but no one near enough to have caused it, and yet the sound lingered behind your ears, not just heard, felt, a quiet click, final, familiar. You didn't investigate that night. Just log the memory. A mental note added to the soft backlog of base oddities that rarely warranted mention. This place had a rhythm that didn't always align with explanation. But the next morning, as you pulled your own locker, open third row, left bank, fifth, from the end, you saw something odd in the row across from you. A locker door slightly ajar, not wide. Just an inch, not enough to look inside. Just enough to invite noticing. It wasn't unusual for lockers to be left open. Sometimes people forgot. Sometimes they meant to return. But this one was different. No nameplate, no assigned number, no sign of use, no record. You stepped closer. The paint on the metal was just slightly darker than the others. Not obvious, but once you saw it, it didn't unsee. A muted gray-green, like old hospital walls or the kind of filing cabinets they stopped making 30 years ago. You touched the edge of the door. Cool, smooth. You looked over your shoulder. Empty corridor, save for the soft hum of overhead fluorescence and the faint buzz of old electrical lines in the walls. You opened it and sighed. Nothing. No boots, no uniform, no personal items, just a single folded slip of paper resting on the shelf. Your name written on it. Not typed. Written in careful script, ink slightly faded. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the pressure of it, the weight of the strokes felt personal, like someone who knew how you thought had tried to put that knowing into letters. You unfolded the paper. 7 words. Centered. You remember more than you believe you do. That was all. You read it 3 times. Then folded it again. Slipped it into your pocket. You looked inside the locker again. Still empty. You touched the back wall. Smooth. Metal. Tapped it. Hollow. You checked for any secondary compartment, any seam. Nothing. Still, the moment sat differently inside you because you had remembered something. A dream. Or maybe not a dream. A place from early in your assignment. A corridor you couldn't find again. A locker you couldn't open. And a voice faint just beyond the range of clarity saying your name, like a memory trying to call you back. Close the locker gently. It clicked into place with the same sound you'd heard the night before. The sound that had started everything. You checked with admin later that day. Asked if a new locker had been assigned to your name. Claimed you thought it might have been a mistake. The officer pulled up the inventory. Nothing. Your assigned unit was unchanged. No new entries. No surplus. No records of unassigned lockers either. And yet the next night it was there again. Unlocked. Waiting. And this time the note was different. Still folded. Still resting on the shelf. But now it read, Locker 512. Echo sublevel. You've seen it before. There was no locker 512. Not on the dormitory levels. Not in the Echo sublevel, at least not listed, but the number rang a bell. You returned to your room, dug through old field notes, even older logs, and found it. An equipment manifest from your second week on base. One of those long, tedious data sweeps no one double-checked. Line 38, 512. Containment locker, Echo cell status. Archived, no access assigned. You stared at it. Archive.unsigned. Still logged. You hadn't noticed it before, but now you couldn't unsee it. The locker that wasn't yours had led you here, and it knew your name. The echo sublevel always felt colder than the others, not in temperature. Climate control ran consistent throughout the facility, but in presence and attention. The kind of space you passed through only when you had to, and never without noticing. How the lights seemed just a little too slow to respond. How the walls held silence like they were saving it for something. You hadn't been down here in weeks, maybe months. The stairs leading into Echo were unmarked now, an old regulation sign had been removed, only the outline of its adhesive left behind. The handrail was cool to the touch, dusted faintly despite regular cleaning rotations. You walked with deliberate pace. No one stopped you. No one else passed. The hum of the overhead bulbs felt dampened somehow, like sound didn't quite travel. Right down here, it settled instead. Rested in the corners, halfway down the corridor, you spotted it. Locker 512 off to the right, where no locker should have been, just a single unit. Set into the concrete, no label plate, no number on the outside, but your steps slowed anyway, because you knew, even before you reached it, your hand already recognized the size of the handle, the subtle groove along the edge. The way it would feel cool against your palm, but not sharp. You opened it. Inside, not darkness, not tools, a folder, a map, a photo, and another note. You picked it up last. The handwriting matched the earlier notes, still curved, still steady. It read, not everything in storage was meant to be forgotten. You unfolded the map. Old, worn, a schematic of the base from before you arrived, before most of the current infrastructure was built, marked in red ink, a corridor that no longer existed. One level down, through what was now marked, structurally sealed, a hallway once called Observation Wing D. You looked again at the folder. Inside, documents, personal files, not complete. Names struck out, lines of text redacted. 1. Page loose, paper soft with age. Testing of residual object memory yielded consistent echoes at 247. Phenomenon is non-repeatable but persists across unrelated personnel. Primary object is passive, emotional resonance variable by subject. Proximity. Recommend continued quiet placement. You set the papers down, picked up the photo, grainy, black and white. It showed a corridor same width as the one outside, but with an added wall of lockers along one side. Your eyes scanned it. Wrote up froze. Third from the end. Locker 512. Clear as day. Same dent along the top corner. Same soft line of wear where the paint had thinned just slightly from years of quiet contact. You held the photo closer, the figure standing beside it, your uniform, your posture. But older, you stared at the image. It wasn't fear that took hold. It was recognition. You knew that stance. The angle of the boots. Even the way the left shoulder slouched slightly from a long-heeled sprain. You never locked out the figure was you, or a version of you. You returned the photo to the shelf. Sat on the concrete floor, notebook open in your lap, wrote. Not because you needed to, but because the moment asked you to join it. You jotted a simple line. How long have I been returning to this? No answer, but the locker's light, soft, cool, constant, seemed to grow warmer. Like a nod. A small wind moved down the corridor, but nothing stirred. And as you sat there, a memory surfaced, one you couldn't place, of a moment spent in front of a locker, quiet, at ease. As though you had been here before, perhaps many times, perhaps always. You returned one last time, long after the rest of the base had gone still. It wasn't planned. There had been no note this time, no sound, no latch clicking in the hallway. Just the quiet knowing in your chest, that subtle shift that tells you something's waiting, not urgently, not loudly. Just waiting. You passed through the familiar turns of dormitory block C. The empty hum of quiet infrastructure surrounded you, low and unobtrusive. Every corridor had its own personality down here. Every angle carried its own shadow. Echo sublevel felt even quieter tonight. As you descended, the stairwell lights followed your steps on, then off again behind you, like a path opening and closing. Just for you. The usual sounds had softened. There was no buzzing in the bulbs. No metal creaks. Just air, patient and still. And then the locker. Locker 512. Exactly where it had been. Exactly as it had been. The photo, the folder, the map all gone now. No clutter. No remnants. Just a single new note, resting on the shelf, folded once. You picked it up with steady hands. The handwriting was yours, not similar. Yours. Even the small slant you'd never quite corrected. The habit of curving your lowercase y too far to the left, and the words were simple. You're ready to remember. You closed your eyes. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the feeling returned like warmth moving up from the floor. Through your legs, across your shoulders. Not heat. Memory. But not as you knew it. Not like watching old scenes play behind your eyelids. More like slipping back into a room you hadn't visited since childhood, where the air already remembers. Your breath and the shadows lean exactly where they always did. You saw yourself years ago, not as an observer, but as a participant. Standing in this hallway, quiet, unsure, holding a note you didn't understand. Not from today, not from this visit. From before, long before your assignment had become permanent. Before the space had learned your name, Locker 512 had always been here, but it didn't belong to you. It belonged with you. It had tracked your arrivals in silence. Remembered the echoes you didn't know you left behind. It had gathered fragments, not things, feelings, pauses, curiosities. You opened the locker again. Inside, the walls were no longer cold. Instead, they radiated a kind of quiet memory, like pages turned slowly through time. And at the back, barely visible, now was an inscription scratched faintly into the metal, not fresh. Not new, but old. Older than your assignment. Older than your understanding. It read, some lockers store objects. This one stores you. You reach forward, touch the metal gently, the texture of the letters, the warmth beneath them, the memory between them. And for the briefest moment, the locker felt full. Not with contents. With recognition. Then, as gently as it had opened, the locker door began to close. You didn't resist, didn't force it to stay. You simply nodded. Let it seal itself. There was no sound, just the soft finality of something coming full circle. When you turned to leave, the corridor felt different. Not transformed, just understood, like a room you'd finally remembered the name of. And as you reached the end of the hallway, just before the stairwell turned out of sight, you looked back. There was no locker. Just smooth concrete. As if 512 had never existed. And yet, you felt lighter, not empty, just no longer carrying what didn't need to be held. Later that night, in your quarters, you placed the final note, the one written in your own hand, into your notebook. It slid between the pages with ease. The edges didn't quite align with the rest of the paper. As though it had always been there. And perhaps it had, because some lockers don't store gear, they store remembrance. And sometimes, if you listen closely, they remind you that your story has been unfolding longer than you knew. The television in Rec Room 4A was never supposed to be plugged in. It sat tucked in the far corner, behind the older chairs and the snack machine with the out-of-order sign taped across its front for at least 6 years. The unit was a bulky, thin cathode ray, the kind that gave off a soft click when powered on and a smell like warm plastic and static. Everyone assumed it didn't work. Everyone ignored it. The base had upgraded its entertainment systems years ago. Central screens, digital access, standard issue programming schedules controlled from admin, Rec Room 4A had been excluded from the update, mostly because no one used it. It was a holdover from a prior era, a corner of the building that existed more out of structural inertia than purpose. But someone had turned the old TV on. It was a Tuesday when you noticed it. You weren't supposed to be in Rec 4A, not really. You were just walking the long way around from Module F to avoid a routine maintenance team waxing the main corridor. The route led past a handful of older doors, all marked for non-essential staff use, and one of them slightly ajar lit. Out of faint light, flickering, rhythmic, television light, and a sound thin, distant, familiar in tone, not in content. You pushed the door open the rest of the way. It didn't creak. It didn't resist. The kind of door that had been opened and closed 1,000 times, even if you couldn't remember the last time you'd seen someone use it. The room was dim. Fluorescence overhead, only one working. Dust settled into the grooves of the carpet like it had taken up residence. 2 plastic chairs faced the screen, one of them slightly askew, the other tucked in close. The television screen glowed. Not brightly, but steadily. A broadcast was playing, black and white. Soft static around the edges. The picture slightly off-center, as if the tuning wasn't quite right. You stepped closer. The show had no introduction. No title. Just a mid-scene conversation between 2 figures sitting on a bench beside a large circular fountain. The picture panned slowly as one figure handed the other what looked like a letter. Their faces were vague, not blurred, just indistinct. As if the resolution refused to settle. There was sound, but no dialogue. The voices moved like murmurs you couldn't quite parse. Not muffled. Just a little too far away to hear, even though they were inches from the camera. And beneath it all, a faint music. Not a tune exactly. More like a sustained chord, a hum that never resolved. You checked the TV. No remote. No dial. No visible power cord. And yet it played. The screen continued, the scene shifting slowly. The fountain disappeared. Now the figures were in a hallway, bare floor, overhead lights. One turned to look toward the screen, not at the camera, not at you, but through. You stepped back, only a little. The moment passed. The figure turned away, the music stopped, the scene dissolved into static. You waited, nothing changed. Then, suddenly, a new scene. A small room, 1 chair. 1 light overhead, and a table with a piece of paper resting in the center. A hand entered the frame, picked up the paper, held it toward the screen. Your name was printed on it. Clear, crisp, not scribbled. Typed. Just your name, no other text. Then the screen went black. You didn't move for several seconds. The TV remained unpowered, glowing faintly, but no image returned. You sat in the chair. Waited. Nothing. The air in the room felt different now. Like the static had crawled out of the screen and rested in the corners of the ceiling. Watching quietly, you didn't report it. You didn't know what you report. Instead, you returned the next day. Same time. Same corridor. The door was slightly ajar again. You entered. The TV was on. A different show was playing. This one looked like security footage. A camera facing an elevator door, timestamp blinking in the corner. The door opened. A person stepped out. Not in uniform. Civilian clothes, carrying something, a duffel bag, too heavy. The person staggered slightly. They looked up toward the camera. Couldn't see the face clearly, but the hair, the height, the posture. It was you. Or someone almost you. They walked to the side of the hallway, knelt, opened the bag. The footage cut out, black screen. Then white text appeared. Do you remember the bag? You didn't. Not in words, but something in the back of your memory shifted. A heaviness. A pull. The sound of a zipper in a quiet hallway. Your hands gripping canvas. You left the room quickly. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't even write it down in your notes. Just. Carried it. That night, you dreamed of corridors that led to rooms that weren't on any map. Corridors that echoed like television static. Rooms lit by screens with no buttons, no plugs. In the dream, you weren't watching the shows. You were in them. And you always looked like you were just about to turn toward the screen, but never did. You returned the next evening with deliberate quiet. Not stealth, not fear. Just a sense of maintaining the atmosphere, like stepping back into a theater, where the show had already begun, and the story would only continue if the room remained undisturbed. Rec. Room 4A hadn't changed. Same flickering light. Same smell of warmed plastic and furniture polish so old it had become a part of the carpet. The television hummed softly in the corner, not beckoning but present, like a sleeping dog that opened one eye only when it heard your steps. You took the same chair as before. The screen was already active. This time a new program. Different texture, but the same. Absence of context. A train platform softly lit from above. No signage, no destination board. A figure in uniform stood alone near a rusted column. Not your uniform, but something similar in posture. They looked toward the track, then away. The image cut between angles, long shots, close-ups, as if an unseen director had chosen each moment without telling you why. Then, static. A voice spoke, not clearly, but louder than before. Still distant, still underwater. Still just out of reach. But it said your name, not with urgency. With recognition. You froze, trying to parse the syllables. Replayed them mentally, over and over. Your name, said as though by someone who had waited a long time to remember it. Then, the screen shifted again. Now, a room, a desk. A file opened beneath an overhead light, typed pages. A photo clipped to the top right. And there, in the photo again, was you, or someone so much like you that your thoughts didn't bother to argue the difference. This version wore a lab coat, smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. The file below flickered briefly, and for the first time you saw words on the page. Echo clearance level, blue, reinstated under conditional review. Prior designation withheld for reasons unrelated to performance. Subject returned willingly. Subject was never reassigned. Then the scene froze, and a tone played, one long note. Not dissonant, not alarming, a recognition chimed. Like when the bass. Doors unlock, then the screen went black. No message. No closing text. Just the hum of the old TV and the faint electric breath of the room. You stayed seated. Heart steady, not racing. Thoughts gentle, but forming. You remembered now that you had been issued a different designation during your first 2 weeks, one you hadn't used since, a number. Not your name. You'd never mentioned it to anyone, because no one had ever referred to you. But now the screen had. Now the television had spoken, as if the facility itself remembered something you had been encouraged to forget. Rose and stepped closer to the screen, reached out not to touch it, but to be near it. And in that nearness, the static rose slightly in pitch. Almost like a breath drawn in. The hum thinned, and for one frame, just one, you saw the screen flash with an image, a door, metal, marked with a black triangle inside a white circle. You didn't recognize the symbol, but your chest tightened. Not with fear, with longing. A memory surfaced, not clear, but waited out a room you once stood outside, unsure whether to knock. You returned to your seat, pulled out your notebook, wrote, "Second viewing. Broadcast includes personal identifiers. Symbol, black triangle, white circle. Feels familiar. Possible dream retrieval." You drew the symbol from memory. It came too easily. Your hand knew the lines before your mind did. You closed the notebook, rested it in your lap, and waited. Another show began. This one even quieter. A person stood in the long hallway, lights flickering slowly above. They were dressed plainly, hands clasped behind their back. You never saw their face, but they paced the hall 3 times, then stopped and looked at a door marked with the same triangle and circle. They didn't enter. They just stood dot, and as they did, text appeared across the bottom of the screen. You've been here before. You left yourself something behind. No further movement dot now. Music dot, just the stillness of the scene, and the faint suggestion that something within you already knew the way back. The screen dimmed dot, and this time didn't return to static dot, just held the last frame like a held breath. Stood again. Check the room dot, no camera dot, no speaker dot, no sign of how or why the screen showed what it did. But you left that night with a name on your tongue. Not your own dot, another dot one. You hadn't spoken since training rotation dot, it echoed behind your steps like a soft reminder. You waited 3 days before returning, not out of caution, though part of you hesitated, but to see if the room would change in your absence, as if the television might forget you, or remember you differently, or perhaps update its intentions dot. It hadn't. Rec Room 4A was exactly the same, one overhead. Light flickering, dust soft underfoot, and the glow of the CRT television steady in the corner. But tonight, something was different. There were 2 chairs now, side by side dot, both aligned with the screen. You hadn't moved the second one. You were sure. The last time you'd been here, it had been tucked near the snack machine, half covered by a torn emergency blanket. Now, it sat facing forward, identical in its distance and angle to the one you usually claimed. Dot, no, note, dot, no explanation. Sat in your usual seat. The television responded almost immediately, like it had been waiting for a signal. That had just arrived. The screen flickered, then stabilized. A long, gray corridor appeared dot. It was familiar dot, echo sublevel, but not as it is now, not as you've seen it. The lights were warmer, casting long shadows against the polished concrete. The door frames were smoother, and the signage used an older font cleaner, serifed, with spacing between the letters like on vintage lab equipment dot, and then movement. A figure walked into frame, wearing your uniform, but younger dot, younger than you remember ever being here. They stopped at a door. One marked observation 3. Though the sign had been mostly scrubbed away, they reached into a coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. They read it, then, without turning, slipped the paper into a narrow gap along the baseboard of the wall. Exactly like you had once done, and that was when it clicked out. These weren't just scenes, they were recordings, not of events you'd watched, of moments you had experienced, replayed, rearranged, retold through a layer of memory not quite your own. You looked again at the screen. Now, a blank hallway, dim, still. Then, slowly, text appeared in the center of the screen, as if typed 1 key at a time. You've always been watching. Then below, but only now are you seeing. The screen held there. You sat still, breathed evenly dot. In the next moment, the image changed again. A familiar rec room. This room dot from above. A wide angle like a ceiling camera had captured it long ago. And the chairs. 2 people dot, one was you, the other not quite visible, slightly turned away. Their face obscured in shadow, but their posture mirrored yours. Their stillness was yours dot, and as the tape played, the second person turned just slightly and said something. The audio was missing. No sound, but the shape of their lips was clear. They said your name, then again, your name. You leaned forward. The television responded by flickering sharply, then smoothing out. Now, a plain white screen, then text. The rec room is not for rest. It is for recall, not entertainment, not distraction. You came here to remember what cannot be logged. Another pause, then, the images you see are not stored here. They are stored in you. The static grew slightly louder, only to dissolve back into silence. You sat in the stillness, let it settle dot, and when the screen faded back to black, you did not move dot, not for minutes. Maybe longer. The hum of the machine no longer felt external. It felt synchronized, as if your thoughts, too, had taken on that low electric rhythm. That quiet alignment was something long forgotten, but deeply yours. You stood slowly, this time. You turned your chair so it faced away from the screen. An old habit from years ago, how personnel used to signal they were done with a broadcast. You hadn't done it since your early days. As you stepped out of the room, you glanced once over your shoulder. The second chair was empty, but it hadn't been. And somehow, you knew it never truly would be again. The door closed behind you without a sound. That night in your quarters, you didn't dream. You replayed. Images flickered behind your eyes, rooms you hadn't entered in years, faces you'd forgotten before they'd faded, words you'd spoken only once, a file you'd never seen, but somehow understood. The base didn't need archives, not when it had you. And somewhere, on a frequency you couldn't name, the rec room was still glowing, waiting quietly. There was a vending machine at the end of Corridor 5 South that didn't accept coins, or bills, or cards. It was the old kind, the kind with physical levers and mechanical buttons. Metal spiral racks held snacks that hadn't existed on the base in years. Yellowing plastic labels promised items like crisp wafers and salt biscuits. And beneath the glass, the faint layer of dust was interrupted by only one thing: a blinking red light beside the number 317. The first time you noticed it, you were on your way back from an extended shift in logistics. The rest of the base had quieted. The corridor was empty. You had taken the long route back to quarters, not for any particular reason, just to stretch the walk. Sometimes it felt better to keep moving when the air was this still. The vending machine looked like an afterthought. Wedged between an unused exit door and a storage locker with a broken latch. It leaned ever so slightly forward, like it was straining to get your attention. At first, it didn't register. Just another piece of forgotten equipment. You'd passed it before, maybe dozens of times. But this time, the blinking red light caught your eye, not rapidly. Once every 10 seconds, slow, intentional. And beside it, etched into the plastic display, where price or error code would usually show, was a small set of characters, glowing faintly. 3:17 a.m. You pressed one of the buttons, B4, where a small foil-wrapped square waited behind the coil. Nothing happened. You tried another. No response. But when your finger touched the side panel, a faint vibration ran under the skin. Not mechanical, not electrical, more like awareness. You stepped back. The machine's blinking continued, steady, unbothered. That night, you lay in your bunk, unable to sleep. The red digits floated just behind your eyes. At 3:12 a.m. You checked the time again. Still restless. At 3:15, you rose. You didn't dress, just boots and your standard jacket over base clothes. The corridor was colder at that hour. Even the automatic lights hesitated before blinking on, one after the other in sleepy succession. Somewhere distant, a soft hydraulic sigh echoed through the facility, like the base exhaling in its sleep. You arrived at the machine at 3:16. The red light blinked, paused. Then, as the final second ticked to 3:17, a low click sounded from inside the machine. A button on the keypad lit up. D2. Nothing else. No beeps. No prompt. Just one slot, one option. You pressed D2. The metal spiral rotated once, perfectly smooth. A small object fell into the tray. Not a snack. Not anything wrapped in foil. You reached in. It was a folded sheet of lined paper, aged and worn soft at the creases. You unfolded it slowly. At the top, written in black ink: "To whoever finds this, IT was never about the snacks." You read it twice. Then again, beneath the sentence, a diagram hand-drawn. A layout of a hallway, arrows, 3 doors marked with simple labels: Access A, Exit B, Stairwell C, and in the corner a time, 3:24 a.m. You looked at your watch. 3:18. There were no instructions, no signatures, no indication of when the message had been written, but something told you to go. The corridor mapped on the paper matched the one near Storage Deck 2, a rarely used wing sealed off most of the time for low rotation environmental compliance. Whatever that meant. You passed it daily, but never entered. At 3:21. You reached the entrance. At 3:24. You arrived at the door marked Stairwell C. It was unlocked. Inside, a small landing, dusty, undisturbed. But on the step just below the door, folded carefully, was another note. This one smaller, like it had been left for a specific hand to find. You picked it up. It simply read, "You've done this before. It always begins with hunger." A slow shiver climbed up your spine. Not fear. Familiarity. You remembered once, early in your assignment, waking in the middle of the night with a craving you couldn't name. You remembered wandering the base in slippers, half asleep, searching for a machine you couldn't quite place. Now, the memory returned in sharper detail, and you realized this was that hallway. You had been here before, and you had found something then, too. But what? The memory refused to return fully. It hovered at the edges, visible, but not graspable. You turned and made your way back to the vending machine. It was silent now. No blinking light. No soft. The display was dark. You checked the buttons, pressed D2 again. Nothing. Pressed others. Still nothing. But as you began to walk away, a soft clink sounded behind you. You turned. Inside the tray, another object. This time, a wrapped item. Foil. You picked it up. A small packet labeled in typewriter font. Salt. Biscuits. You opened it. Inside, 3 small round wafers, pale and dry. You tasted one. It dissolved on your tongue with a strange, comforting warmth, like you'd eaten this before many times. Maybe as a child, maybe here. The sensation was soft, settling. Pocketed the remaining 2 and stepped into the corridor. Somewhere behind you, the machine clicked again. And for just a moment, you thought you saw a soft red glow at the edge of the display. Then darkness. The next morning, the vending machine was inert. You asked maintenance about it over coffee. No one recalled seeing it in years. One tech swore it had been removed during the last remodel. But when you checked the records, there was no mention of it. Not installed, not removed, not even inventoried. As though it had never existed. You returned again that night, waited in silence. At exactly 3:17 a.m. The red light blinked on again. You waited that night without expectation, not with anticipation, not with fear, just the quiet awareness of a rhythm reemerging, like tuning a radio dial toward a frequency just beneath the surface of your thoughts. One you hadn't noticed until it started to speak back. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the light blinked on. No click, no fan, just the pulse dim red, perfectly timed. 1 blink, 10 seconds, another. The buttons were all dark except one, A3. It without hesitation, the spiral rotated with the same sound as the night before, soft, metallic, nearly nostalgic. A quiet mechanical certainty in a world full of guesswork. Something dropped. You reached into the tray. This time, not paper, a key, small, brass, unlabeled, but tied to it with a fine cotton thread loop was a tag. Supply room 9B. You knew where that was. Or rather, you thought you did. The base maps only listed 8 main supply rooms. 9B wasn't on any schematic you've been given, but somewhere in your memory, tucked between a late-night walk through the East Wing and a fire drill that had rerouted everyone through the old North Corridor, you remembered a door, unmarked, unused, once blocked by a stack of box cables. The kind of door you pass only when forced off dash course. It had a key slot. Not a badge raider. At 3:25. You stood in front of it. The corridor was dim, one of the few areas where overhead motion sensors hadn't been installed. The light flickered in slow, tired pulses. You inserted the key dot, it turned without resistance. The lock gave a soft click, not loud, but final, like the sound of a sealed envelope being opened for the first time in years. Inside, darkness. You stepped. Forward. The room lit itself, but not from overhead. Small lamps along the baseboards glowed softly amber, indirect. Like ambient lighting in an old archival lab. The air had weight to it. Not musty, not stale, just thick. As if the space hadn't been moved through in a long time. Shelves lined the walls, not labeled, not inventory. Each held small items. Personal objects, a pair of reading glasses, a compass. A child's drawing, folded into quarters. A watch still ticking, though its face had cracked. None of them were tagged. None of them belonged in a standard supply room. On the back wall, beneath a narrow pinboard, sat a table with a journal laid open. Its pages yellowed, but the ink still. Fresh. You leaned in. The top of the page read, Inventory, 317 transfers. Below that, a numbered list. Some items had notes beside them. #004, salt biscuits, recovered. Memory returned 1207, number 09 locker key, unclaimed. Waiting for correct iteration, number 011, watch from subject E, still ticking. Temporal anchor stable. The entry labeled number 017 was blank. The space beneath it held only a horizontal line. He flipped backward through the pages. Earlier logs, some with scribbled annotations, some with diagrams. One page, dated 20 years prior, read, "The machine is not a delivery system. It is an interface. It engages only at 317, the liminal threshold between dream encoding and physiological reset. Recipients vary, but selection appears conscious, not mechanical. Items are memories, or catalysts, or both." He flipped forward again. Entry number 021 read, number 021, photograph, black and white. Rec room 4A, viewer identified self in mirror behind camera. Further analysis pending. You sat down slowly. The journal page beneath your hand felt warm, just slightly. Not from heat, but from use. You began to write. Not on the log itself, but on the blank page tucked beneath. Second retrieval, 317 activation confirmed. Machine appears sentient, not in function, but in timing. No access outside designated hour. Key led to room 9B, previously unrecorded. Items here feel remembered, not stored. Vending machine interface behaves as selective archivist. Unclear whether objects are placed or returned. You paused, wrote. Again, unclear whether I'm the one selecting or being selected. You looked back at the shelves, moved to the one nearest the far corner. A label beneath the shelf read, unretrieved. Subject P-2003. You didn't know anyone by that designation. You reached toward the item on the shelf, a coin, old, foreign, faintly etched with a symbol you couldn't name. As your fingers touched the edge. A wave of warmth passed through your chest. A memory, fleeting. A train station. Your fingers in someone else's hand. The sound of an unfamiliar language spoken. Softly in farewell. Then, gone. Just a flicker. You pulled your hand back. It wasn't yours. Not yet. You turned toward the door. The lights along the baseboards dimmed slightly, as if sensing your intention to leave. The door swung closed behind you with a whisper. Look down at the brass key. Still in your hand. You returned it to the vending machine tray. As if on cue. The machine clicked again. The red light turned off. And for a moment, just before the corridor light flickered out, You thought you saw a brief message in the display. Thank you for remembering. The machine didn't activate the next night. Set across from it, just past 3 in the morning, boots planted on the chilled tile floor, back resting lightly against the cold of a storage locker door. The corridor was silent. The hum of the base's environmental system pulsed low and slow, like a subterranean breath exhaled in the quiet of a sleeping world. But the red light never blinked. No. Buttons lit up. No hum of readiness, just a dormant box of glass and steel, reflecting your still shape faintly in its surface. And yet, you didn't feel forgotten, you felt known. The previous nights had not been dreams. The journal, the key, the room that didn't exist on any map you had returned. To each, found your own writing, your fingerprints in the dust. Evidence of moments that would never make it into reports. They weren't events, they were reminders. That next morning, as others awoke and the base stirred with the shuffle of boots and cafeteria trays and status reports, you walked to Rec Room 4A. You hadn't visited it since the broadcast, hadn't needed to, but today, something in you wanted to see the screen again. When you arrived, the door opened without resistance. The room was the same, it always was. The light flickered overhead. The chairs still just two faced the screen with their backs at identical angles, like a ritual frozen in place, but the television was off. Not unplugged. Not broken. Just quiet. You approached and sat in your usual seat. No static. No flicker. Only your own reflection in the dark screen. For a long while, you stayed like that, watching yourself sit still, as if waiting to see what memory might surface through the stillness. And then, very softly, almost imperceptibly, text began to appear across the screen, faint, white, as if written by typewriter. On old thermal paper. Some machines deliver items, others deliver selves. You asked a question. The vending machine answered, not with snacks, not with things, with remnants. The text paused. You leaned slightly forward. The screen glowed faintly warmer, as if acknowledging your attention. More words appeared. 317 is not a time. It is a door, and below that, you've opened it. The screen then shifted briefly. An image flickered, a frame, a single still, the vending machine as seen from behind. Its casing pulled open. Inside, not snack racks, but rows of small drawers, non-electronics, but compartments, each labeled in handwriting. Some had names, some had symbols, some had nothing. Then, the screen dimmed again. You stood. Left the room in silence. Later that night, as 317 approached, you returned again to Corridor 5 South. The machine was already lit. Its red glow pulsed gently, not urgently. One button was illuminated. C5. You pressed it without thinking. Something dropped into the tray. You reached inside. Not a key. Not a note. Not a photograph. A cassette tape. Clear plastic, labeled in pencil. Slog. Echo room. Recovered feed. You turned it in your hand. The tape inside was wound tight. The spools silent. You hadn't seen a working cassette player in years, but you knew one existed. You'd seen it once locked inside a box in admin archives, a leftover from analog surveillance review. It had a scratched case and a broken rewind button. It was never used. It was never logged. The machine blinked once. More. A final click sounded. And inside the tray, now resting where the tape had been, was a folded paper. You opened it. Final retrieval. What you hear is not a recording. It is a return. You pocketed the paper, held the tape carefully in your palm, and walked the silent hallway. Later that morning, hours after 317 had passed and the base had resumed its waking rhythm, you stepped into admin archives. With quiet certainty. No one questioned you. The box was right where you remembered. Inside the player, you inserted the tape. Pressed play. For a long moment, silence. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Yours. A vending machine humming. A voice whispering your name. A door opening. Not heard. Remember. The player ticked on, and as the sound unfurled, so too did the memory of a night years ago. A version of yourself wandering the corridors after a power glitch had cut the base lights. You'd found the machine. You'd pressed the button. You'd retrieved something, but no one believed you. You had filed no report. You had forgotten Dot until now. You sat there in the quiet, listening, and the voice, your own voice, barely above breath, spoke from the tape. If I find this, tell me to come back. Tell me to remember. It's not a machine. It's me. The tape clicked. Stop. Dot. You held. It didn't rewind, didn't erase. Just placed it back into the box. Dot. And for the first time in a long while, you understood the vending machine didn't give you things. It gave you back to yourself. Dot. It was supposed to be a shortcut. The corridor between hydroponics A and the south pump maintenance annex wasn't on most people's internal map. It was narrow, dimly lit, and never used unless a particular environmental leak needed inspection. Even then, it was more of a footnote than a feature. A straight-line passage lined with rusting conduit panels and a floor. Just a shade too slanted to feel intentional. You first noticed the discrepancy during a shift. Reroute. One of the primary elevators was down for quarterly recalibration, and so your scheduled circuit pushed you through unfamiliar side halls. It was somewhere around 2:30 in the morning when you turned into the corridor, half distracted, half focused on the hum of your headset. The walk felt long, not unusually so, just subtly stretched. Your boots struck concrete in quiet rhythm. 16 steps. Then 32. The lights flickered in sequence, one every 10 paces. That detail stood out. It shouldn't have. You checked your wristpad's motion log. The corridor spanned approximately 48 meters. But your log registered 62.3. You dismissed it as a glitch until the return. You walked back through the corridor, same direction, same route, but this time, the lights blinked all at once. Not in sequence, and it only took 39 steps. Wristpad said 47.1 meters. You hadn't taken a detour, hadn't paused, hadn't changed pace. You stood just beyond the end of the corridor, eyes narrowing, glance behind you. The corridor looked unchanged. Same. Scuffed metal panels, same flickering tube lights. But something was off. You looked at your boots. The dust on your right sole had a thin line drawn through it, like something had scraped beneath your foot mid-step. That night, you marked it in your log, south corridor, discrepancy in return distance. Subjective time also altered. Felt longer going, shorter coming back. Possible low-grade magnetic interference. You didn't believe the note. You were just trying to label the unease. The next night, you tested it again. Same route, same time. Set a stopwatch from hydroponics A to the maintenance annex. 1 minute, 42 seconds. From the annex back to hydroponics, 1 minute, 11 seconds. Same pace. No interruptions. Only different. You stood at the entrance and stared into the passage. Nothing unusual. No shift in temperature. No warping of air. But a low, low hum, one that hadn't been there before, seemed to hang just below your hearing threshold. The corridor once more. Counted your steps aloud. 40-8 to get through. 36. To return. You frowned. Looked down. There were now 2 scuff marks on the toe of your right boot, identical, parallel, neither of which had been there before the corridor walk. You filed another note, this time handwritten. No digital trace. Corridor length discrepancy persists. No visible change in structure. Minor physical evidence suggests transitional interference. Feeling unease increasing. Corridor remembers passage. That night, you dreamed of walking through the corridor.